Okay, are we on? Yep, that sounds like a microphone. I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of the Board of Education and the CRC. So welcome board members, welcome members of the CRC. Good to see you, good to have you all. I think for the record, we have, what did I just count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of the CRC. We think 7 or 8 makes a quorum, so we're not quite yet at a quorum of the CRC, but we do have a quorum of the board, so we're rolling like that. We will go ahead and do our Pledge of Allegiance and salute to the New Mexico flag in English and in Spanish. I don't know if you all do this regularly at the CRC, but
do not.
We do for board meetings, and then we'll do our acknowledgement of tribal land. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo la bandera del Estado de Nuevo México, el símbolo Zia de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas. And the acknowledgement of tribal land. We acknowledge that our Board of Education meeting is taking place on occupied indigenous land. We acknowledge the Tesuque Pueblo lands and other tribal lands on which we stand. We honor these people, past, present, and future. We acknowledge the history and ongoing colonization of where we are sitting right now in New Mexico and in our country. We acknowledge our own place in the story of colonization. Thank you very much. That was a lot of voices in good unison, better chorus than usual. Moving on to the approval of the agenda. Superintendent, do we need any changes?
There are no changes, President.
Thank you. And just to say, I think for the simplicity of these things, we're looking at board votes, not board and CRC votes for a bunch of these items. So we'll just be doing board members voting on these things as appropriate. Okay.
Board President Noble?
Yep.
I move to approve the agenda.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or issues? Otherwise, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise? Okay, we've approved the agenda. Now we have our introduction of interpreter. Superintendent, how's that going?
Do you have an interpreter tonight?
She's here.
Yes.
Can somebody introduce her? Or maybe come to the microphone?
Yes.
Welcome, CRC member. We now have maybe a quorum of CRC members.
Para introducción en español, Esmeralda Peña para servirles.
Muchas gracias. Okay, moving on to public forum. We have received, and I hope all board members have had a chance to review the emails. So we will take public comment in person. We've received the emailed comments. And I do want to say there will be some discussion, partly about the role of the CRC and how we all work together with the item Midtown Schools looking ahead, but there is not a decision point tonight, just so that anyone who's wondering about that. But Joe, if you would go ahead with public forum.
Thank you, President Noble. Superintendent Dr. Griffin, I'd like to go over the Santa Fe Public Schools Board of Education Public Forum ground rules. Public forum includes online and or virtual participation as needed, as well as in-person comments when the board holds in-person meetings. Please listen and speak with respect. No uncivil conduct will be permitted. Please do not discuss any specific student who is not your own. No sharing of time. Self-monitor and observe the 3-minute time limit. You'll receive a 30-second warning when your time is almost up. Public commentary and dialogue are allowed only during the public forum, not throughout the meeting. Please search for answers on common ground. You may speak on any topic, whether it is on the agenda or not. Your input will be taken into consideration. Please be advised that the board may discuss your issue during the meeting, but by law, the board cannot take action on items that are not on the agenda. Please do not discuss employee matters which may result in disciplinary action. Instead, notify the employee supervisor, the Human Resources Department, or the superintendent. And with that, I'd like to bring up, and just so the board knows, we have 6 in-house speakers tonight. First speaker is Kimberly Will.
Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Griffin, and members of the CRC. Thank you for keeping EJ open. Thank you for agreeing to look into rebuilding us as a small school. Thank you for looking into what a new roof may cost for the existing building. Thank you for seeing that our kiddos are learning in less than ideal conditions and that we send them to school every day to an unsafe environment, especially unsafe should an emergency occur. I'm not quite sure how we changed the minds of board members on that last school board meeting. My guess is that our children had a lot to do with it because we've been asking for what you all agreed to look into since August. If it was the kids that swayed that meeting, I'm grateful because that means that you're putting their needs first, and that's what we have always wanted. It's clear that we can't stay at Chaparral anymore. It's also clear that the Milagro community doesn't want us there, and just to be clear, that was never our first choice. Our first choice has been and will always be to be back in our own building. These are my asks tonight. Would there be a way to put us back in the EJ building in a section that is safe while work is done on the portions of the building that need work? Would it be a possibility to demolish the worst part of the building and start rehabilitating the roof just on the part of the building that is still in good condition? We might not get a brand new school, but maybe we can just keep the good parts and renovate it. Not necessarily tear it all down and rebuild, just fix what needs fixing and adjust what needs adjusting. This would make it so that any funds that would have been used to retrofit the buildings that we would temporarily be housed in would be put towards a permanent facility for us. Also, at the last board meeting, we were told that portable buildings would take 8 to 9 months to get to us and would cost $200,000 apiece. Would there be a way to reach out to Albuquerque Public Schools and see if we could borrow or rent some from them, or even buy some from them? They are a big school district that seems to constantly be doing construction on schools. Maybe they would be willing to help their neighbors. It feels like we're really making strides here, and it feels like we're being listened to, and that's a great feeling. However, I wonder how much communication happens between school staff and the school board and the CRC. Is there a way to further open lines of communication between you and our educators to move forward together in the future? As of right now, it seems like the board and the CRC make big decisions without knowing the impacts of the decisions that they're making. This needs to be a collaboration because no one knows the needs and challenges more than the
30
educators
seconds.
that are in these buildings with our children day after day. Please, going forward, always include them in conversations and decisions because we're better together. It feels really good to be moving towards a solution. Let's keep this momentum going for these amazing kids, educators, and faculty members. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Sophie Hegman.
Good evening. I'm Sophie Hegman, a teacher at Chaparral. I've worked for a year and a half in a building shared by 2 schools, Chaparral and EJ Martinez. I'd like to share some thoughts and observations. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. So my 3rd grade students regularly ask me what is happening to our schools. They know the situation is unresolved, and they're trying to understand what that means for them. I believe it is detrimental to both the Chaparral and EJ Martinez communities for the district to continue to delay their decision regarding the future of our schools. For far too long, families and staff have been told that a decision was forthcoming, but it has repeatedly been deferred, prolonging uncertainty. Being left in limbo without clarity or control is stressful. Both of our school communities have been living with this stress for over a year and a half. I feel the needs of our students and communities are being lost in the politics of the decision-making process. Over 300 students and 50 staff are coexisting in very cramped quarters and carrying extra stress that will continue until a decision is made. Sorry. Each time you delay the decision, chaparral gifted and special ed classes continue to take place in a corner of the hallway. And each time your decision is delayed, chaparral-related services continue to use whatever space is available that day, competing with foot traffic and the noise of the copy machine. Each time a decision is delayed, chaparral reading and math intervention continues to take place in a corner of the band room. Every time this decision is delayed, our two communities continue to live under unreasonable and in an unacceptable situation. This simply isn't fair to our students, faculty, and staff. There's no perfect decision. However, the lack of any resolution feels like the worst possible outcome for both of our schools. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Jessica Lang.
Good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Griffin, CRC members. My name is Jessica Lang. I'm the instructional coach at EJ Martinez, and I'm here again tonight to urge you all to recommend to relocate EJ to Milagro, to the Milagro school site. This is not just a facilities decision, it's a student equity and student safety decision. Our students are learning, growing, and succeeding, but they're doing so in a building that's inadequate compared to others in this district. The poor conditions of our building impact students every single day. How they feel, how they focus, and how healthy they are while learning. I work with student data every day. Our teachers are doing truly exceptional work, and we're seeing success. But just imagine what our teachers and our students could do in a building that does not fight against them every single day. Our current location in the top portion of Chaparral does not meet our most basic needs. We're so grateful that the board sees value in our school and our community and wants to keep us together. However, we cannot remain in our current location. The information given to the board last Thursday was clear. The building is shot from top to bottom. The money and time it would take to make that building work to meet our basic needs is extensive. Money that seems wasteful and time that does not exist. We need relief now. In an ideal world, we would be able to be back in our brand new building, either as EJ or as a new Midtown elementary school that offers a new site to many more SFPS students. I hope forward-thinking and long-term solutions are discussed here tonight. However, in the meantime, to solve immediate needs, the Milagro site offers a solution that honors both equity and continuity. A school within a school allows EJ to remain intact, as well as leaves Milagro intact, while providing all students with a modern, healthy, and dignified learning environment. Milagro's doing great work, and we are not trying to derail that success. We want Milagro and all SFPS schools to thrive. The SFPS mission statement speaks to safety and equity. You have an opportunity to honor that mission and the promise made to our community by placing our students in a facility that supports them not only academically, but as whole children. Their safety matters, their health matters, their future matters. I urge you to recommend relocating EJ to the Milagro campus for equity, for stability, and for the health of our students. Thank you for your time and service to our district.
Okay, Next speaker is William Swanis.
I'm William Swanwick. I'm the SAGE teacher at Chaparral and Kearney currently. And I used to teach in the wing that is now E.J. Martinez. It is an older wing. And so what I came here to do is really talk about making a fair decision for both schools. I feel like Chaparral has a whole community that's there that's not really talked about when we talk about this issue. And so it really needs to be brought up that EJ is there at that same building, and it is one building. And it is not just a building that can house two schools. I know that it was mentioned at the last school board meeting that Chaparral only utilizes 37% of the school building. I don't think that's the way to really look at it, because really it's a redundancy of having two schools at one site that's only intended to have one school site. Even though Chaparral is not at the capacity to fill the whole entire site, it is not, the building is not set up in a way where two schools can exist at that building site. And then we know that EJ has not actually had a positive experience at our building site, at Chaparral. That has been made very apparent. I think that they need a solution, and they need a real solution that's coming. When I heard the last board meeting, it sounded to me as a discussion that you would hear earlier in the process. We need something to be done now. It needs to be done, and I mean not at this meeting, but at the next school board meeting when a vote can be made on the agenda. I would like all of you to think about what would actually be fair. I don't know personally if that is the Milagro solution or if that is rebuilding E.J. Martinez, because I don't have enough data on that. But the discussion has been back and forth enough that we need to make a real decision either way. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Grace Meyer.
Hello, everyone. I'm a retired educator and the retired NEA Santa Fe president for this district for over 22 years as a teacher and 15 years as the president. I also served on this committee for over a decade. So I come to you today with some institutional knowledge about how this, our merger at Milagro came about, and also to advocate to maintain Milagro Middle School as a comprehensive middle school at the current site. Over 15 years ago, we had a school called Alameda Middle School, where Aspen is. It was closed and students relocated, and so was staff. I actually saw plans for the art room, which I was going to get when we moved back. And so did Santa Fe High teachers. A lot of teachers moved to Santa Fe High thinking they would come back to Alameda. They never did, because that was determined that they were going to consolidate and make a middle school there, which is now Aspen, which, by the way, EJ parents should maybe go take a look at. It's a wonderful facility and has vacancies and spaces. DeVargas Middle School and Capshaw Middle School were the two other middle schools in the Midtown and downtown facility that went through a decade-long process where we had inappropriate facilities. I didn't have a sink in an art classroom. The classroom, we had to pull out a wall like Capshaw to make things work. When I was at Pinon, prior to that, there was 14 portables. This board made a commitment to not put portables back into schools, and this CRC committee said we were going to eliminate portables because many of the portables house not just related arts teachers, but our special education students, which we found to be immoral, because it is, to relegate kids to portables without being part of the true community. Regardless of how this came about, although I really wish people would understand the kind of trauma that the educators and some of the current staff and some of them that are here lived through with all of this. It was very challenging. So there was back and forth about what campus they were going to choose for the consolidation of Capshaw and DeVargas. It was decided that the best campus was the Midtown campus near the DeVargas, then was closed, but not prior to our 8th grade staying there with 100 students. When I stayed at DeVargas and many of our other students went to Capshaw. The merger happened, and it's a great facility, and it should be maintained as a middle school, and we should add 6th grade, which we've been asking for over a decade as well. But I just want to add one more thing. We had Mandela there, and that as a school within a school campus, and that did not work at all. And they were the same grade level. And so what I'm saying, and what the former speaker said, is it's not going to work because there's always going to be shared spaces. There's always going to be one library, one art room, one cafeteria, one music room. You know, those things are not going to be able to be merged with 2 different schedules. A middle school schedule has 6 periods. For 1 period of the day, the gym will be available. Not every student is going to have PE in a gym if you have pre-K to 5th grade at, Milagro. Also, the facility, I just want you to know, over 12 years for a sink in my career, because I was at Pinon. Then I went back to this other merger thing, and I still didn't have a sink. Gabe Romero finally got me a sink over there. So there is a lot of us who've lived our whole, our whole professional life in substandard conditions. And I was grateful that finally this worked. And I had a beautiful art room with a sink and a dedicated kiln and an outlet that works. And, things that I could go to a beautiful library that has an amazing view. And I wish that kind of environment for every one of our students. But at this point, I want you to understand that for 20 years, we waited. And I don't want you to break it up, and I don't want you to makeshift it, and I don't want you to put in, this and that. I want you to maintain it as a middle school, and I don't want you to add portables anywhere. But I just come to you with a little bit of that institutional knowledge and hope that maybe someone calls up Maureen Cashman to talk about the portable thing, because she worked really hard for a decade to get us out of portables. Thank you.
Board President, we have an additional name that I added to the list.
That's fine.
Rebecca Gutierrez is our next speaker.
Good evening, members of the CRC, board members, and Superintendent Griffin. My name is Rebecca Gutierrez, and I'm a 4th grade teacher at A.J. Martinez. I spoke at the last board meeting, and I'm just here to just kind of echo some of what I said in the last meeting. I'm writing to express a concern regarding the current facilities serving our students here at A.J. Martinez and Chaparral, and to respectfully advocate for a solution that prioritizes student safety, stability, and educational quality. At present, the building in use at Chaparral Elementary is inadequate to meet the needs of our school community. Limitations related to space, infrastructure, and functionality make it increasingly difficult to support effective instruction, student services, and daily operations. These conditions place unnecessary strain on students and staff at both campuses and do not reflect the learning environment that all students deserve. It is critical that our students remain together in a single appropriate facility. Maintaining cohesion is essential for academic continuity, social-emotional well-being, and the preservation of our school culture. Fragmenting the student body or placing them in substandard or temporary arrangements would undermine these goals and can negatively impact learning outcomes. However, Milagro Middle School presents the most sensible and practical solution of all the solutions at the table at this point. The site is capable of supporting our current enrollment and offers the space and infrastructure necessary to accommodate instructional programs, student services, and operational needs effectively. Utilizing Milagro Middle School would allow our students to remain together in a proper educational setting while minimizing disruption to their learning experience. We respectfully urge the CRC to consider this option carefully and to support a decision that places student safety and needs at the forefront. Providing a safe, functional, and cohesive learning environment is not only a logistical necessity, but a commitment to educational equity and student success. Thank you for your time, consideration, and continued service to our community. We appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective and are hopeful for a solution that best supports our students.
And our last speaker of the night is Lisa Morley.
Good evening, board and superintendent and the community, Chaparral and EJ as well. I know this has been very difficult for EJ, and that's all we've really heard about is EJ. To the board, to the SFPS Board of Education and Superintendent, Chaparral Elementary urges the board to come to a fair and equitable resolution. We would like to invite each of you to visit our school for a full day. You would likely see the forced fluidity of a Monday or Tuesday morning at 8:30 in the staff lounge. If you were there, you would observe teachers making copies and having conversations about daily logistics or student behaviors or a cross-grade band educational conversation. The digital learning coach may be testing robotics or assisting students with Chromebook issues. One of the related services professionals might be prepping for sessions for the day. The technology teacher may be completing an online required testing coordinator professional development, and the interventionist conducting a second grade math session all in one room at the same time. This flurry of activity is not best practice. The board has created an untenable environment in which children are expected, once again, to be resilient in poor educational settings. COVID online learning was not ideal, and neither is this. During the past meetings, it has come to my attention that the board does not know what is truly happening on a day-to-day basis at Chaparral. I have heard comments, probably intended as benign, but have come across as antagonistic and deeply disrespectful to those of us who have dedicated our lives
30
to
seconds.
the craft of teaching in this very unique community. We have heard the words, passion, discomfort, suggestions, and excuses of people outside our school. However, there is very little energy put into the discussion about how all the choices made so far have detrimentally impacted us, Chaparral Elementary. I'm not privy to the words or observations that would
Time.
cause. Can I keep going or no?
You can go ahead and finish and be assured, most of us, I think all of the board members have read your email,
Okay,
but yeah.
thank you. I'm not privy to the words or observations that would cause a significant enough reaction from those of you sitting before me. However, at this point, the board has been addressing the present issue for over a year and a half, and there's been no decision. The time has passed. At this point, there is a negligence of equity. The board's obligation to the students, teachers, and families at SFPS to make a final decision that is fiscally responsible while fostering a sense of effective leadership. Rezoning is an option, as is Chaparral absorbing the students of EJ. Moving EJ to a different location is an option as well. There are many more options of which you are already aware. Please choose one and let us move forward. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
And that'll conclude public forum tonight.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you to our speakers for being here and speaking to us, and thanks to everyone who has sent emails. Again, we do read those. We will move on to our number 4 on our agenda, action item, which is 2025-2026 School Year Board of Education Committee Representative. This is ultimately board members, and I'll go ahead and make a motion, assuming there's no objection from board member Blea, to nominate him to serve on the audit committee with me.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those board members in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed or otherwise? Okay, moving on to number 5 on our agenda, presentation, CRC policy, roles and responsibilities. Superintendent.
Thank you, President. We have a one-pager just for the committee to be able to review roles and responsibilities, and we have included the policy as requested.
There we go. Okay, thank you. And we have co-chairs of the CRC, yes? And
Yes.
Board Vice President Bose, and April Gallegos is our other co-chair on the CRC. And I don't know if anybody has any particular thoughts on going through this or presenting the information or discussion or questions, but I don't have a particular thought on how this rolls from here. Do you?
Board President Noble, Superintendent, thank you for putting this information together. I think it's helpful. We have some committee members that have been with us for a few years, some that have been with us since before my time. That's April. I think you're the most senior serving member now as far as time length. So, and then some new members that just started with us in August. So this, again, is just kind of to ground us in our shared purpose, and hopefully, you know, I don't know that this needs to be read out loud, but there's an opportunity certainly for committee members to ask questions, I think, and if there's any need to have discussion around this. That was my thought.
And if Board Member Bose, I could just add that for the public, all of these are online if they wanted to read them and learn a little bit more about how the committees work. But we're all appointed by the board, and we serve year to year, and it's all volunteer. We, of course, don't get paid like the board. So our only vested interest is really the students and the community. Any other comments or questions from CRC members? Thank you.
Well, and I'll just say, and how long have you served on the CRC, Board Member Jose, Vice President?
Since January of 2020.
Okay, since she came on the board.
Starting
is when that
my
was.
7th year.
You know, on this, these are board, we're leaving out time. Huh? Leave out an hour. Meeting of the board.
Is it? Well, I know we took it in, I wonder about that as a committee of the board, because we don't nominate the board members the way we do for CRC. Well, yes, anyway, we could talk more about that, but,
And again, for the public, this is Board Policy 118.
yep. Yeah, we do have microphones to share all around, I think. But ultimately, you know, and there's a lot of language here that is very focused on the general obligation bond, which Vice President Bozay and I have talked about. It's a 4-year cycle. We did put one in front of the voters in November of 2025. And the CRC, of course, recommended a breakdown allocation of that bond and does a lot of work in an ongoing way to get updates on those projects. You know, I consider it a capital committee, almost a public works committee for the school district, because there's a lot of capital work money, bonds that go to the public, and other oversight that, given the other things that the board oversees, it's very helpful to have the minds and vetting of this committee on that particular thing. And, you know, I guess I will just say, by way of maybe getting any conversation started, and if nobody has any questions and nothing to say, we can move on. But I will also say that as the superintendent and I were talking, I found myself saying, you know, there needs to be the basics that we have in front of us in terms of sort of the establishing documents, the policies, committees of the board, and then it needs to be worked in an ongoing way. And Board Member Bozay, Vice President Bozay, sorry, let's keep doing that, has advocated for more joint meetings between the board and CRC, and I would just say I really support that. If, you know, there needs to be not a gap between what's happening at the CRC and what's happening at the board. The board does have 5 people, 3 of whom can make a decision on any given item. That's, you know, the balance of the 5. And the CRC is an advisory recommending body, in essence, but with a lot of really important work and vetting that is needed by the district and the students and the administration and the leadership and the board. So ultimately, we're also at, I think, a fairly important junction in the road where we're going to talk about housing, which is pretty, and that's sort of ahead on our agenda, but it's a whole new thing. And, you know, so that might be a perfect example of where we need to work this in a situational way, and maybe improve communication and interface between the CRC and the board, because we can talk this until we're blue in the face theoretically, but until we're working through a GO bond, a reallocation, a housing issue project, I think we won't get a full view of the issues of the moment. So in other words, I want us to do the work of substance and talk about the roles sort of as we go, if there's decent clarity to begin with.
I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, President Noble. I joined the CRC relatively recently, and so I've been wondering, you know, I come in as someone with an expertise in woodwork. I have kids in the public school system, but I'm not an expert, and I take it that's kind of the point of the CRC in a way. It's close to the community. We're not expected to be experts necessarily in public education, but at the same time, we need to try to become as familiar as we can with the issues that are coming before us. So my question is a general one, and to everyone, the board members, other CRC members that have been around for a longer time, which is just generally, in your experience, what does a good CRC member look like in the sense of what are they doing outside of the meetings? What are they studying? Where are they going? Yeah, what does a good CRC member look like? Thank you.
I would love for April to answer that because I think that April is really an exemplary CRC member. Not just the most senior member, but like in my mind, it's studying the documents that were provided and looking at those in the context of everything that has been discussed before and finding the hard questions. Like, you know, you've brought up transfer matrices, like where are the kids? If they're not in our buildings or they're not in their zone schools, where are they coming in from? Where are they going? And those are kind of that's the crunchy details that I think help our work be better. But I would love to hear what else you have to add to that.
Well, thank you, Vice President Jose, I appreciate that. But I've learned from lots of other committee members before me. Grace Mayer was one, and also Marie Cashman was on the board. And then also, well, first she was a CRC meeting, then she became a school board member, and then she went back to the CRC. So there's lots of benefits of being on the CRC. You get to really know all of the buildings and different things about the district. But as Sarah said, it's really studying, and really being here is one of the most important things, is committing to that monthly meeting. And I know it's hard, but the district does a good job of having remote meetings as well, which is nice, and so you can stay involved that way. But really just kind of studying up and really being a part of your community as well, and speaking to people. I've been thinking a lot about this issue and a lot of other timelines and such, but you know, things change dramatically. A lot of things stay the same, but a lot of things change dramatically as well. So when one person was public speaking in her chaparral shirt, I was remembering it because I went to elementary at Chaparral. So I was thinking, I wonder, do I still have any of my Firebird shirts? That's like one question that popped in my head. But you know, back then, Chaparral was totally different. My family had just moved into the Bellman area. Chaparral wasn't quite ready yet. My brother had to go to Nava, then moved to Chaparral. And I remember, even though I was super young, because it must have been later, I had to have already been far in advanced in elementary school, but the huge controversy at the time was that Chaparral was an open concept school. And lots of people were up in arms about that. Oh, there's no way I'm sending my child to an open concept. That makes no sense. How are they going to learn? And the district still went ahead and did it, and it worked. It worked for many, many years until it didn't work, and that's when the district decided to close the school. But you know, I mean, things change quite a bit, so we have to stay on top of that and in touch with our community as well. One thing that I've been trying to do as a committee member is I feel like I got involved in this game really late. My daughter was already in first grade. I really should have been involved in public schools and what was going on when she was born, or before she was born, once we decided we were staying in this community. Just to stay on top of things, because when my daughter just lived her school year, she's a senior now, those decisions were made, you know, 8, 10 years before she even started school. So that's what we're facing today. And we're not going to affect any students, any huge change to students who are in school right now, unfortunately. I mean, the short term is going to be a little tough for a lot of students, but we have to really look at the long term and try to talk to as many different people as we can, not just our own little communities, because we already know what they're thinking for the most part. We talk to them all the time. And talk to people who aren't involved in the school system, get their perspective, business people. Everyone always has an opinion, and they're happy to share it with you. The only thing I will caution is you have to be very clear that we can't make any promises. You know, we're just fact-finding, gathering information. We recommend to the board, and it's the board that makes the decisions. So, yeah, you don't have to be a construction expert at all.
Thank you for that. And I just want, because it reminded me when you were saying it, I would like to recognize CRC member Simon Mott with his young child in the background.
Babies representing.
Hopefully, impacting change for his child's future.
I actually have a question, is that right?
Yeah. You can bring the baby up here too. We don't care.
I want to be distracted.
Okay.
He needs a lot of bouncing. What do you think the CRC's role is with respect to what's happening with PJ and Chaparral, and how could we be supportive at a really high level? As a CRC member, it's felt awkward to me to have folks come and share what you're sharing and not know, not know exactly how to help with the situation. So I'm just wondering what help the board members would want from us to help find a definitive solution. Because it seems like the pain points are abundantly clear, but the path to a solution is not. I'd love to be helpful.
Okay. You know, that's a really good question. Thank you. And there's been a lot of, I would say, misunderstandings of things. You know, I don't believe, for what it's worth, that there's been any promises made and broken. I have read a lot of emails about that, but ultimately, you know, there was this whole question around the 2025 bond and the general obligation bond and how much it would cost to rebuild EJ. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that was a meaty part of work from the CRC. And, you know, the record shows that there was a recommendation that included $35 million to rebuild EJ from the CRC, which, when it came to the board, was changed. And that was changed, I can speak for myself, in part because the cost had more than doubled from $14 million, and we're on a relatively tight timeline, getting a new superintendent on board. There were a few things going on ahead of the November ballot. Now that bond has passed, based on what the board put in that package for the general obligation bond, and we are where we are. Even if everything had carried or there had been a perfect $14 million number to rebuild EJ, we still wouldn't have that money yet, because the bond passed in November 2025. It takes a minute to do bonds. It takes a minute to plan new construction. We wouldn't have done extensive plans without the bond passing because, you know, anyway, so there's a lot to it. So this idea that was in a few emails today that said we were promised a solution in 3 years, and that was 2 years ago. I just don't even understand where that came from, because it was always about the 2025 bond, which just passed. Now going forward, and I hear you, pain points and whatnot, and we're going to talk more, I mean, sort of jumping ahead on the agenda to our Midtown schools looking ahead. I guess my view is, and I'd like other board members to weigh in here if you feel so inspired, but that we need the CRC to do some work looking at the Midtown schools, looking at the big picture, looking at the big plan. We've heard a lot from the community about the need for a really comprehensive plan, given our declining enrollment and given the thing that we've seen for a long, long time that involves maybe most immediately EJ, Chaparral, Nava, and without taking too many breaths, we're pretty quickly needing to talk about Kearney and Salazar as well. 5 Midtown schools that are fairly close together. So, you know, we'll talk more about that in the future. I think, you know, with the benefit of hindsight and perfection, it would be great if all the questions had been answered in the CRC vetting of the bond. And I wasn't here, and I don't know, and I think a lot of questions were, and the same thing as with the board and the bond process. It's hard to get a lot of information out there for anybody who didn't sit through hours and hours of of presentations on facilities and all those things, but in a perfect world, the CRC would be able to be out there, to be community interface, and to be very clear on what decisions and recommendations were made and why.
So just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you're kind of viewing the EJ and Chaparral moment in the context of the bigger demographic shifts and the other capital investments and various decisions that have to be made kind of in a long view. And then some of those projects are going to move through the CRC participating and thinking there. That makes sense to me. And then as far as the like short-term acute moment that the kids are in right now, because like we heard, like we can plan for the long term, but it sounds like the kids are and the teachers are
Yeah.
are in a pinch.
Thank you
right
for.
now. But kind of like, is it yeah? How can we show up for that like short-term solution in the context of this bigger puzzle?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you know, again, I do want to hear from other board members. Oh, good. One board member, Blair, is going to say something, but I'll just say, a lot of the pain point now is on the superintendent and the board, but I do think that, and to some extent, you know, the magic of a committee happens in people working together, and that's the point of a committee, and so that ultimately, I hope, especially as we have so many new members, I can't believe you're the most senior member. I remember when you were appointed. But it has been a little while and a lot of lifetime, April, thank you. But, you know, if, as the CRC and with your chairs put items on the agenda, creative solutions like, you know, the committee can ask questions, make recommendations, more brains are better. You know, again, I do think that the pain point of the moment is not specifically the remit of the CRC as much as it is of the board and superintendent, but ultimately that also doesn't mean that the CRC doesn't get to have a voice and do the work on it. Board Member Blaya.
Thank you, President Noble, Vice President Jose. As I'm kind of listening, and I think that's a really good question, because for me, as we kind of talk about one facility, one community, we have to kind of look at that, especially when we're looking at housing two communities in one. We can't look at what does one community mean at the expense of the other community. We have to look at what's the, what I need from the CRC is to say, okay, as we're looking at the FMP, and if we're looking at doing these kind of transitions, I mean, because we've heard about how the building, I mean, last week when I went home and I sat there, and you know, when you're quiet and all that stuff, things start popping in your head. And one of the things that popped in my head is it sounds like there's a lot of issues with the building. It's clearly not working for EJ, but why is that building, that's a subpar building, good enough for Chaparral? Right, like that's what I kind of struggled with. Like, so I get it, and I think EJ, you know, there's been a lot of discussion around EJ, but I would like the CRC to come and say, when we're looking at the FMP, what is going to happen to a building that houses two? In other words, like, how is this EJ going to go over to Chaparral? How is that going to impact both communities, and how is the building going to be kind of assembled? And as we kind of talk about Milagro, I kind of feel like we're making the same mistake, but now at Milagro. We're not looking at how is that going to impact, and thank you to the woman who was explaining a lot of the scheduling things. I didn't even think of that. Like the scheduling stuff is also kind of something to kind of think about. So there's like a lot of nuances and layers that, I mean, I don't think we all can have all the nuances, it's impossible. But I do think that the CRC is a really good opportunity to reach out to those communities, and you know, it's on one of the policies that says this is what the CRC does. So that would be super helpful to say like pros and cons of both communities and say how is the building going to impact both communities positively and negatively. So I would say that's kind of how I would like to see it.
Thank you for that. I think there were two things that I kind of wanted to add to give a little bit more context, and one for the newer CRC members, like the events of the last 6 months in addition to the layer of the EJ Chaparral stuff, I mean, we were doing that at the time that we were doing it because of the FMP and the bond. That sort of forced it to happen at that time. And that is a process, again, that we go through every 4 years. So like, that won't be what we do on a regular basis. And while President Noble is correct that I think, you know, the decision sort of lies with the board at this point, I also don't want you to feel like any of that experience wasn't valuable, because it's given you really, really important context for our buildings aren't just buildings, right? It's the thing that we say, that they're the places where our kids learn, and our teachers have, you know, used their passion to excite young minds and all of that beautiful, incredible stuff that we know happens. And so now you've really had an opportunity to see the layers of those things, to bring the numbers and the papers to life, because that's what we have to hold while we're making decisions. And so, thank you. I know that it's been hard. It has been hard, and we can take what we've learned and continue to improve our processes and do better and think more thoughtfully and carefully and more in advance, you know, whenever these questions come up.
And to go back to what Dylan's question was, I think it's asking hard questions. I think Sarah said it really well. I mean, to me, and April's point of showing up, like just making the commitment, and the question was, welcome, Mr. Mackey. What does a good CRC member look like or do? And, you know, to some extent, I guess I think like a good board member, it's up to each of you. When I got on the board, I sat down twice with every sitting board member before I even took office. And, you know, that was just really important to me to get history, oral history and that sort of thing. But ultimately, I think showing up, being there, and asking good questions, I'd put as sort of the top two qualifications, because, and again, committees are subject to groupthink. And so anybody who can get outside of that, especially, and poke a hole in that, I think is really valuable, or at least be like, have we thought about this from a whole other angle? Or, you know, because what's clear is we need creative solutions and ideas and good questions and vetting. Anything else on this? We're still sort of on policy roles and responsibilities of the CRC. April, you've thought so much about this. I know over the years.
Yeah, and it's always been a challenge, just that two-way communication between the board and the members, but we're each appointed by a board member. So Kate's the board member that I serve for, so I try to have lots of conversations with Kate as often as possible, especially with the big issues. And one other thing that I forgot that is vital is it reminded me when you were talking about how in August, how there was just a huge crunch of time and so many things happening, is for us as CRC members to also watch the board meetings on YouTube, come in person, because that really helps us know what the topic du jour is and where the community and the board's heads are instantly. You know, we don't have any catch up or have to worry about that. You can just stay on top of it pretty easily that way. But yeah, serving the community, it's a challenge, because you want to hear from them, and we're very happy that people come, because board members, and we can't be in the schools all the time, but site visits are also so important. Over the years that I've been here, anytime we have an opportunity to visit a site, you learn so much, and that's where a lot of your insight comes, to be able to figure out what to do, you know, the questions to ask, and come up with some good solutions. If one school's doing it, another one can, that kind of thing. That's it.
Thank you. Anything else on this? We can keep talking as we move on our agenda. Going once, going twice. All right, moving on to item 6, committees, discussion, and possible action. We start with a housing resolution, which we have 2 resolutions in front of us, if I'm not mistaken. One from the 2023-2024 school year. Grace Mayer was instrumental in this one, that passed October 2023, I remember. And then we have the recent one from the 2025-2026 school year, which looks at a, therefore be it resolved, Santa Fe Public Schools Board of Education establishes an educator housing task force to develop concrete and timely recommendations for addressing the educator housing crisis in Santa Fe County. For those who've been following closely, this was also in the 2025 general obligation bond. 4 million? 4 million was our number in the 2025 general obligation bond for educator housing. We have also had a couple million in previous capital outlay, and it is our ask, which is 14 million in 15. There's too many. That is our ask before the legislators that we put forward to the Santa Fe delegation at our breakfast early in January for this session. And it says, be it further resolved, the Educator Housing Task Force shall include CRC members and 1 representative from NEA Santa Fe with the option to invite participation from key community partners as appropriate and no more than 2 members of the Santa Fe Public Schools Board of Education. Otherwise, it's like a board meeting. Operating under the guidance of the CRC with recommendations to be vetted by the CRC prior to presentation to the Board of Education. So the Housing Task Force, to be clear, will bring the recommendations to the CRC first per this resolution. And then build upon existing needs assessments, data collection in prior years, update items as needed to reflect current conditions and avoid duplication of effort. Partly just reading between the lines, I think I definitely had a hand in writing some of this, but we have a lot of information. We've done a bunch of surveys. If we need them again, we can do that again. That can be at the discretion of the task force, but we also don't want to needlessly be prescriptive. There's also a lot of data, of course, in the facility master plan about populations and various different things. And the point being, we don't want to send a housing task force on a wild goose chase gathering a bunch of data and without getting to concrete recommendations in an expedient manner. Again, develop specific actionable recommendations and strategy within 3 to 6 months. There's the timeline outlining how available state legislative funding, including previous and hopefully within 29 days to be agreed capital outlay, bond, $4 million, and other resources that can be used to support educator housing. Identify best practices and potential partnerships for educator housing projects locally and statewide. So also to say that this is, and just speaking for myself, this has been a crisis. Again, we did a nice resolution back in 2023-24, October, about this. The crisis for educator housing has been ongoing for many, many years and getting worse. So here we are. We're doing something about it. It is also a fairly significant departure from the expertise of a school district to do housing. And I will go ahead and say, as someone who knows maybe enough to be dangerous, I did supervise, not run, the city's housing office for 3 years. Fortunately, we had experts to run the department, but it is complicated. And we do not want the school district becoming a housing authority. It is just, our focus is education, and we need to be clear on that. So I feel really strongly about how we delineate lanes as we go forward on this. And that's, again, we're gonna need partners. We're gonna need expertise. We're going to need a lot of things that we don't have in-house necessarily. And then finally, be it resolved, the Santa Fe Board of Education, Santa Fe Public Schools Board of Education reaffirms its commitment to ensuring that educators can live and thrive in the Santa Fe community, recognizing that housing stability for educators directly strengthens the stability and success of Santa Fe's public schools. So, of course, therein is a little bit of a goal statement. What would you add here?
I mean, the committee had a brief presentation on this in December, so I think they saw the similar timeline that we presented to the legislators at our breakfast a few weeks ago. And this, you know, we're ready to, I think, form the task force. We're calling it a task force and not a subcommittee. And then the rest of the committee members can recognize that you'll see the work of the task force before it comes to the board. So there's a hand for everyone in this, because again, we have that timeline, we need to get moving. Yeah, any questions? Or we make the task force?
Yeah, I think there's questions of who, what, when, where, how. And it says, sorry. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Danny.
So when we had the presentation in December, we talked about the immediate need, setting up a committee for doing the immediate need of getting the housing, and someone, oh, sorry. There we go. And some of us being part of the future, the outlook. So finding a way to balance the two, the future, and trying to take care of what the school district already has set aside for housing, and figuring out how to get funding and building that out. So I think that was a good of approach. I don't know if we still want to move that way, but I just remembered how because some of us were getting into, well, we should look at other property, but we still have this one property that we have to get moving right away, that the resolution sort of addressed. So I just wanted to bring that up again.
And so can somebody help me understand, what is the immediate need and
Well,
why would
this project.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Okay.
project.
Yeah. That
And then it was
property.
like, what happens after that?
Yeah.
And who's thinking about that? And so maybe it's phases of the task force. And certainly phase one is pretty clearly identified in the resolution. But, you know, there were questions about what after that. And how do we continue to make sure that we're staying ahead of this? So, you know, the way that I envision it is that the task force can do their work, and again, it'll come to the CRC, and maybe once this phase one work is completed, we can either define the next phase for the task force, or it can be something that the CRC holds on an ongoing basis. And when we get into another intense project, we break off into another task force when we have a development underway.
So it's looking at our immediate need and future needs is basically what we were talking about, and breaking it up into. So, because it's just not this one project, it's many projects down the line possibly.
Well, and it's not even defined yet. It's the need, the future need isn't defined, and I think that's also part of the work of the task force.
President Noble.
Yep.
Vice
Go ahead, and then
President
we'll-
Gose. Sorry.
No.
So at the previous meeting with the CRC, we had discussion about, and we didn't really land on how we wanted to roll out the task force. We had a couple of different options that were expressed, whether or not we broke off with a smaller group that was more intentional and very focused on the immediate need, and then possibly also creating a second one that looked at the long term. We also had discussion around whether or not the CRC meetings would become the task force meeting, and I I don't believe that we landed on any type of.
No decision.
Right, there was no decision made at that time, so I don't know if it would please the board to have that conversation now about how you would like that rolled out, or if that would happen at our next CRC meeting.
No, I think we're doing that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Jessica.
Let's not push any more decisions than those we have to. Yes, go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you, Board President and Vice President. Just a question about, to make sure that I understand, like, the timeline and the commitment. Are we looking at like a relatively short-term task force that would complete its body of work within 3 to 6 months? Or is this like a long-term project?
I mean, truly, in just reading the words, it says 3 to 6 months. That doesn't mean the board couldn't extend it, but, you know, generally a good idea for us to pay attention to what we pass.
Okay, so there's that time, and that would be 3 to 6 months from the date of the resolution?
Or the formation of the committee.
Okay.
Or the task force.
And is there like a minimum and maximum number of task force members you're looking for?
No, so, and that was very deliberate, that it be light on, because sometimes these resolution can be like 2 from this category, 2 from this category, 2 from this category, and 4 from this category.
Super prescriptive.
And,
yeah.
and that by design, this was kept a little bit lighter for the committee to chew on, decide, and even evolve and iterate. It doesn't have to be one thing, I don't think, you know, yeah. I mean, it is a little bit prescriptive about there need to be CRC members, and that's plural. So let's say more than one, I would say. And a representative from NEA Santa Fe. So that's to NEA Santa Fe to think about, you know, I suppose they could decline, I hope you don't. But ultimately, you know, an NEA, and then with the option to invite participation from key community partners as appropriate. And then no more than 2 members of the board, which keeps us clean on open meetings. But ultimately, you know, personally, I'll just jump ahead and say, welcome to Board Member Abeta, who of course has joined us. And I think that he needs to be part of the Housing Task Force, and he hit CRC member and board member. So, you know, we can talk about that.
I would also very much like to be on the task force.
That's 2 people. And again, we have the goals, as I guess, as to the question of immediate and long-term, I would say, I think we need to start with the immediate, because there's that immediate need. And that as far as looking to the long term, I guess as committee forms and people learn to work together, it strikes me as if there are lots of people, I don't know why we'd do 2, because once the vocabulary and established relationships and once things get going of people working together, it'll be way more efficient for that group to look at the long-term stuff, I would think, rather than trying to, I mean, I'm concerned about how many,
parallel,
how many groups we have. Yeah, go ahead.
President Noble, Danny, so, because you've obviously given it some thought, what would you recommend?
So what we were looking at is, in December was, there were some, because there are 2 different tracks. You're looking at a way to make sure that there's, everything's moving to get the project up and going, and making sure we're getting the information on the one site on the south side. And then there was also options of, well, what's there's next? And some people were saying, well, can we look at this site or that site? So that's when, at the last CRC meeting, we were talking about, well, maybe we have 2 different types of task force. One for that specifically drills down and works on that one site immediately, and then we can venture off, and another task force look at future sites or other opportunities.
That's what was brought up and was discussed in the.
Just a follow-up, would you recommend that kind of a path?
Because you're using, I think you're using two different types of, and you might be able to answer this better, because looking at how to develop a site is different than looking at what's future sites, I would say. So finding two ways would be a better way to break up in the work, I would say.
I don't know if you want to add anything about that.
All right. No, it hears me.
Intermittently responsive.
Okay.
To be patient.
I'll see it and raise it one. I mean, I think there's another way to think about the organizing around this, which is like, I don't think you can necessarily divorce the short-term project from the larger question, which is actually a question of strategy. This project, the one that's undertaking now, has to fit into a larger strategy, and those things are going to inform each other. In general, as someone who attends a ton of meetings about housing, I don't think more meetings about housing are going to solve housing. If they would, we would have solved it a few times over by now, because we've had enough meetings to... If we just got one house from each meeting, we'd be in a better situation than we are in right now. But like, I think the bigger question isn't like a linear question of like, we do this and then we do another thing. It's like, we're doing a thing, how does this thing fit into a strategy? I think the technical side of building the housing is fairly well covered with the existing expertise. You have people who build complex projects all the time. It's a little different because it's residential. What needs attention is a program, and the program is, how do you set rents? Who are these houses for? How long do they live there? How do these things operate, right? So like, in normal public schools context, you have the gift of a formulaic approach to funding and all these rules from the state about how things operate. Housing's not like that, right? And so how this housing operates, if you're going to own it and run it, that's the big question with this immediate project. But that approach has to fit within a bigger strategy, or it's sort of anecdotal, right? This is the problem we make across all housing. We do a thing, and we don't fit it into a bigger framework. So I'd argue that like, we need to sort of hold both those things. Those things interact. They've got to be the same expertise, and the people making the decisions about strategy also need to be enmeshed in what's happening at the programmatic level. So that would be my recommendation. I would not try and break those out personally. I think in terms of like, I've been thinking about this a lot since our last meeting. And, you know, I think keeping a group relatively small is helpful for these types of things. I think people with technical housing expertise in terms of being able to recommend programmatic designs and strategies. I think it also is helpful to have some people who carry over and bring community perspective and also carry back the nitty-gritty of those technical conversations to the larger CRC and to the board, right? So I think those things are all important. So yeah, I mean, I think what we actually are talking about here is like the schools needs a housing strategy, and it's being forced to have a housing strategy because it's doing a housing project, right? And to save itself from doing a project anecdotally, it needs to fit into a framework. And that would be my recommendation of sort of the intent of this task force. To have a work product is to advise programmatic design for the existing housing and to inform a larger strategy that could be longer term and talk about what those next steps are, and get us out of the project-based, you know, we've got land, let's, you know, it's like, this isn't like us shopping for a new house. This is about us trying to solve a systematic problem with teacher retention, with these things. So like stepping back to that level, because it may not be as simple or as hard as building a house, right?
President Noble, Vice President Bose. So as you're talking, and I kind of like what you're talking about, because that's what we kind of settled on, that we kind of needed to do last meeting about not just, you know, I'm sorry to keep talking about it, but EJ, Chaparral, Milagro, we also need a larger framework of like a strategy in general, and that's kind of what you're saying. But, and I'm just asking at the CRC, would you guys see like a facilities master plan kind of including like this housing kind of module within like a overarching kind of facilities kind of situation, or is that just not? It's like, because these are all, they're all facilities, right? Like, how does all this, and they're all.
Yeah, I think that's a board question, truly, and I think the answer is no. Like, this is not, we're not adding housing to our facilities master plan. We're doing a housing project, and I would agree with Daniel that we're doing a housing project and we need a strategy partly because we're doing that, but adding it to our portfolio writ large, I'm kind of a hard no on that. Go ahead.
And I would just add that, like, a lot of probably the most effective housing solutions are going to be programmatic, not capital intensive, right? Like, building housing is the hardest way to solve housing problems. It's like one of the most expensive, costly, complex things you can do in modern society. So there's tons of other things that'd be great to do, things like down payment assistance, even rental assistance. There's like faster, cheaper, easier ways to achieve a lot of the things than building new housing in like the most expensive development environment ever, in one of the most, on public land, in one of the most complex regulatory environments you could imagine. So I think it's part of it, but like to think of housing just as a built thing, I think solving teacher housing issues is actually a programmatic question, not a physical building question, right? And so physical building will be part of it, and you've got a physical thing teed up, and so that forces the question, but to do it right, you really want to think about the bigger programmatic approach and make sure that you're getting the most for what you're doing, but also studying and interrogating, asking the hard questions, right? Which are like, does building a housing unit for $400,000 make more sense than doing $400,000 worth of rental assistance for twice as many people while you fix the structural lack of housing at the right place, which is the city's zoning and funding mechanisms, right? You're doing a triage thing right now. This is like the larger system has failed. You're triaging for your key people. And that's right. That's the right thing to do. It's not the best long-term thing to do to get into the business of programatizing a triage approach.
Just want to add to that. I agree. And I think that it also gets to this question of equity when you're talking about a major financial incentive for a small group of teachers, when the potential is to spread that money across a far greater number with something like rental assistance. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind too.
Yeah. I think equity is a core part of all this, and with a small number of very expensive units, you create winners and losers, right? That's the other problem, and I think that's the theme that underlies what we hear with schools, right? Like, so to the extent that we can think about this, and there's opportunities, right? Like a well-designed housing project with a good program can actually generate income that could be used for other things, right? Like there's ways to think about how these things interact. But yeah, I think when we talk about a housing strategy, it needs to move way beyond just the idea of building housing, because that's not something that generally in the field we recommend people undertake. But in an emergency situation where you need to retain teachers and you need to do something and you have the money, you do it, right? But long term, and teacher, like I'm trying to delve into the technical side of this, and I can tell you guys the cans of worms that are involved in this that like no one's thinking about. Fair housing. What do you do if someone quits? Do they get kicked out to the street? I mean, like, there's just a lot of really tough programmatic questions that when we just think like, oh, we just need to build a house. This is what we do a lot. And I'm dealing with this with like other people that I'm working with, public entities that are trying to build housing because they're dealing with the same thing. And it's like, these are really tough, challenging program design questions that will flow from building a house.
Yeah, I'll say that that really is because I think so much about health insurance that I am so nervous about creating a situation where we now have done housing that's tied to people's jobs. Like, they already have health insurance that's tied to their jobs. And like, yes, it's a crisis, and so we're doing what we have to do, but like, that's my number one, like, what about that? How do we not, you know, make situations worse? So thank you for bringing that up. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I think it would be essential, and I know, I can't remember the logistics of what they did, but up in Summit County in Colorado, they had a similar problem. And that was with also the city workers, because you couldn't get the plow guys to plow snow because they couldn't afford to live in Summit County, and then they had to come in from like Colorado, Denver, and it just didn't make sense. So they dealt with this similar program of, and I don't know what their end was, but I know that it was in a newspaper I read, and they had to develop something to get the teachers properly, because the teachers, you know, it's all like this big ball of twine. You know, the teachers need to get there, the snowplow people need to get there, a lot of the police need to get there, because it's it's really like a giant bowl surrounded by huge mountains, and they had to do that. So it might help if we can find more people, more areas that have unique situations like we have, but yet similar to them in the need to house people and to offer housing for them. They're out there. There's different situations. We just have to figure out how they were successful as well.
Board Member Blair, did you?
Just a question on the task force. Would the task force look at programmatic type stuff like Mr. Woolworth is talking about?
I mean, I'm thinking that is the most important part of what the task force might do.
So that's kind of like what you're saying too. Okay, sorry, I was trying to wrap my head around it.
It's good. Go ahead, Jessica.
So I'll just weigh in quickly to say that, my thinking aligns with Daniel's on this, that I think it makes sense to keep it a single task force. Let's not separate, and let's keep the continuity between, seeing through this project already undertaken and the greater long-term programmatic strategy. And assuming Daniel is on this task force, I will also express interest in serving on the task force as well, if only just to continue to listen to Daniel talk about housing and to learn from him.
It's good fun. Well, to move things along a little bit, I want to suggest Daniel chair the task force. And we can talk about that, and you can express your willingness to say yes or no.
I should have kept my mouth shut.
And I guess, to where you were going, Board Member Blea, I'm sort of thinking, and maybe we can do some work here together to say, what I've heard is strategy and program are really the key areas to define. And I was just looking, and there's not really, let's see, because I don't want to discourage anything, but oversight of the project and how it's being built, and if they're putting in the right stoves, maybe that does matter, I don't know. But that's not called out here as much. And again, we do have a team, anyway, sort of finding
construction updates to CRC.
Yeah, and that do complex projects and all that. So finding the sort of balance, because I don't see the need for the task force oversight role, and it's called out it's not called out explicitly here, but the strategy and program. Because we do have a certain number of units. I think Jean's done a pretty decent design on that property. Not to say that we don't need to still ask hard questions and see if we can poke holes in your design there, Jean. But ultimately, we have estimate numbers of units, we have a property identified, we have a project that's moved a decent way. And thinking about the strategy of, I've been sort of talking about this, as obviously a bunch of us have been thinking about, but if we have, 2,000 employees, más o menos, might the Santa Fe Public Schools strategy involve targeting units to house 10% of them? 200, let's say, or some reasonable number if we're thinking about this, and maybe this is the longer term, larger program that Danny was talking about, but I would love that sort of question. How many, for whom? We talked about this before, and based on a survey we did once upon a time with NEA Santa Fe on housing that, again, Grace deserves credit for. We had some good answers as to the needs and sort of who our workforce is, who our educators are. And I don't remember the specifics, I'm guessing Grace does, but but I do remember that some of what, and having had an opportunity to talk to Daniel about housing a few times over the number of years, which is a lot of years, it's more than a decade, just to be clear. And for anybody who doesn't know, Daniel Werwath was the developer for the Arts and Creativity Center, those nice units on Siler Road. And there's a lot more history, but we'll leave it there in terms of the expertise is deep. But that we might think about, given that this is rentals, I think we've talked about that, but that's sort of a question. Is it renters? And I just remember the conclusion we got to at one point was looking at educators in sort of transitional scenarios, which would be targeting significantly or thinking about as the audience folks that are moving here for other places to get a job, because we know and have seen that if we can keep folks, 3 years seems to be a kind of magic number. If we can keep folks beyond that. Maybe we would target this being, a place that people rent from, pick a number, 1 to 7 years, that we robustly plug in down payment assistance, HomeWise, home buyer readiness, housing trust programs, to get people on paths to home ownership out of the rental housing, and that's part of the explicit program, and that transitional life moments might be moving here. It could be somebody downsizing. It could be somebody whose landlord sells the place. That's increasingly a concern. And that's a big transition. And I don't know how this works with fair housing and all those sticky wickets that you're identifying, but just to hit some of the highlights that might be in a strategy. So we have clear target audiences, goals, and at least have defined a strategy for the district, even in terms of aggregate numbers, because I think it's real easy to start going, well, what about this piece of property, and what about that piece of property? But we got to step back for a second first, and how many, for whom, for how long, how much, what some other key
Employment
questions.
status.
Yeah. Employment status, that's the
Union
real
status,
sticky one, yeah.
because if you want to terminate someone and you're in housing, how is that going to work?
I have no idea, yeah.
So,
but
I mean.
some of those
you
questions.
need a lawyer? No.
And the first, the first piece is probably defining a bunch of questions to be answered. You're just waving. Okay. Yes, Carmen? Okay. Go ahead.
One more thing I would just offer is I think in addition to the already sort of identified potential participants on this task force, would be good to bring in some other technical housing expertise. Strategic, but also some practical. I've been trying to think about that, but don't have answers right now, but maybe that's something that we could leave to be figured out in the interim before the next CRC meeting or something along those lines, or for everyone to think about, like, who do you know in this field? Because, I think there's a couple different pieces. I think really the key stuff that we need to be thinking about is like, you know, how do we leverage the assets that the schools have to the maximum extent, right? And that takes, you know, there's some financing strategy pieces there. You know, people like land use attorneys, people like bankers who work in housing, those are like helpful technical experts. I just think about like in the nonprofits that I've served in or for, we often had development committees, and a good development committee was like, you know, a couple realtors, an actual builder, a land use attorney, someone who works at a bank, right? Those people that like can sort of represent the different pieces of putting together a successful project and have that insider knowledge and you know, things like that. So those are just some thoughts. I don't have specific recommendations, but I think maybe that's something for everyone to think about. Who a couple people might be like that, or even settling in on what those characters, you know, sort of like a board matrix, right? Where you're like, we need an attorney and a banker, you know, just.
You made a pretty good list, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably among those, but yeah.
I think Simon has
Let's get him a mic.
General juggling type thing.
Something that it appears to me in like just listening to the conversation is that there's like clarity about a problem to be solved, and yet to be clarity about what the role of SFPS is and what the role of the task force is. So I feel like, I don't know your name.
Daniel.
Yeah. I feel like I hear where you're at with like those technical expertise. I feel like that's a little cart in front of the horse for me, because it's like I'd be curious about a task force that's like really focusing on what is the problem we're trying to solve and how does this fit into that overarching strategy, like you had said beforehand. So I feel like that's, and I'm also curious about what this moment in our meeting is. Are we talking about the scope of the task force? Are we trying to identify it? What's the problem we're solving right now?
I think right now we're trying to form the task force so it can do some work.
I feel like there's also like a real, I'm curious about the other, I think we heard from the board, there were a couple people who were like, yeah, let me get on that. I'm curious about our fellow CRC friends, like who has bandwidth and who has interest in this, knowing that part of it sounds like part of the beginning, if we're going to launch it soon, part of the beginning is like hanging out in the meta question to be able to land exactly what it is. Does anybody got time and interest?
I'm down.
I'm available in 30 days.
What does that mean? And operations management, and so, construction, maybe. I did the 73 apartments once. I just making sure they were managed by a second person.
As we're adding to the list of people, like bankers and so forth, I think we also should think about having someone from HR or somebody internal to help with rules that are policies that the school district already has, and to fit into the scope of, well, if we do this, will it violate a policy or an HR rule? So understanding that process as well. Yeah.
We also have a collective bargaining agreement. I mean, that's, I think, maybe the point of the NEA rep, but we you know, it's.
There's so many nuts and bolts even before you get a front loader on that property. I mean.
You might already have a front loader on the property. I don't know.
I live near there, so I go by it. But it's, there's just a lot. There's just a lot of things, and then like ongoing, once it's built, then you have to, well, who's gonna manage, who's gonna oversee the management company, what are their real jobs, the what that contract is, you know, that's even a separate contract. So, I mean, there are people here that could handle it, like HomeWise or something, I don't know how that works, but there's just, that whole thing before anybody steps in is huge. It's just huge. Unions and contracts and construction contracts, and who do you do for this, and who do you get for managements, and it's, yeah, that whole part is just huge on its own.
Reflecting on Simon's point, I think that if the board wanted to, you could create a community of experts to reflect on these issues. I'm assuming the reason you came to the CRC is because you wanted to fall under the auspices of our particular, what we represent in the community and what we represent for the schools. So to my mind, we don't want that to get completely overshadowed by experts. And I could easily see that happening if we get together and there's a bunch of people who are experts in these fields. I could easily see feeling like, well, why am I here? And so I assume there is a reason why CRC members should be there, and that has to do with the specific interests of the schools in this process. And so my recommendation would be to go ahead and form the board of whatever CRC members want to be a part of it, the committee, and then to maybe discuss what specific areas, after we've talked about some of these more general, more maybe almost ethical questions about where we're trying to get, define what our role as CRC members is in thinking about this question, and then define what those specific areas are that we need help in, and then look for those individuals. That would be my suggestion.
That lands for me. I feel like also for the CRC member, I feel like we need to be real with ourselves about what our actual desire to engage is. Like for me, I would love to be on the task force and I have like relevant skill sets. But what's more important to me is that task force ability to like move swiftly and engage others as needed. So I would be happy, like I feel like the skill set that I bring to it is kind of like, I'm a like strategic planning facilitator in my day life, in my day job that does a lot of stakeholder engagement. So right, there's somebody else there who's like, cool, I'm good at planning, I'm good at thinking about when people need to be engaged. I would be happy to like not be there, because I feel like once you go more than like 5 or 6 people, the meetings become really hard to land. Like we're in a big meeting here, and it's cool, and it's like, but we kind of stay hanging and abstract about it. I feel like smaller is better to like land things, and I would trust people to then. Like, I would love to sit on the CRC and have somebody come from that space and frame the real specific question that you need my input on. I feel like that's also really important. So we all join. It's going to be a CRC meeting. It's going to be brutal schedule. Well, half the time we've just been catching up on the main meeting we missed. And so I'm happy to be in, and I'm happy to be out to support that up.
Thank you for that wisdom, Simon. I think there is something to be said for being lean and actionable to keep things moving.
I mean, I would offer, just from the sort of strategic processes I've been involved in around housing, it's often there is a core team that's working on developing a thing, but they interact with like an oversight committee, right? And CRC could sort of be that entity, right, that shapes the questions that they then go solve and then bring the answers back for vetting, right? That a lot of times is a good process, and I think the way this is written, it sort of implies that in terms of this being overseen, the recommendations being overseen by CRC. So like, I mean, I think it obviously needs more work. I agree with smaller is better in terms of the actual committee. But I think it is really the core job of the CRC to frame the questions and the sort of framework that this task force is then has a task to solve. Like it needs a task to identify it. And so I would say I would offer that like one of the ways to do that would be to spend some concentrated time as a CRC identifying, exactly what these, core questions and things that what the scope And then figure out a cadence of checking back in with the CRC, reporting out, pulling in expertise as needed, and tasking the CRC with the core community outreach, fiscal oversight, and those other core responsibilities that are the CRC's and its muscle in that goal. So that would I think that sort of solves maybe a couple of those problems in terms of like engagement and, you know, making sure it's grounded and not off doing its own thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Board Member Blea, I'll go to you next, but I do think that what you said there was kind of key and answers one of Dylan's concerns, which is I don't see the experts that we pull in as being full-time task force participants, right? They're there to answer a question.
As needed.
Right, like it's a resource, in my mind, and maybe that's not the intention, but you know, that it wouldn't be heavy on experts, you know, it would be a couple key people, and they're answering the questions that we don't have the information about. Go ahead, Board Member Blair.
President Noble, Vice President Bose, thank you. As I'm sitting here, and thank you, Simon, for that. You know, I really like nimble committees, and I also prefer, just in general, I'm very like internally locused, and I think knowing the people that I do here, I don't know everybody here, but the people that I do know and have seen, I think there's enough expertise already at the table to be able to form a committee. I could name the committee right now based upon what I know and the backgrounds. Between Vice President Bose and Member Abeta, there's a wealth of information just there. Danny has just a wealth of being able to navigate systems. Obviously, Danny obviously knows this stuff super well. So I don't think, you know, we need to go and, you know, have a sprawling committee. I think the task force could go out and interview the people that they need to, or reach out to the experts that they need to. I mean, there's capability here to do that, and there's a lot of professionalism already at the table. So, I mean, that's just what I would say is be nimble, use the resources that we have already at the table that clearly know this issue very well, and just kind of go from there and not, you know, spend a lot of time on reaching out to other people and trying to collect experts and all that other stuff. Let's just keep it internal and with what we have at the table, because there's a lot of knowledge here.
Other thoughts, comments? Well, I guess, I mean, it sounds like we're sort of reaching agreement, and anybody can, you know, avoid groupthink here if you want. Ask the hard questions. Be the divergent voice. What Daniel outlined and given, I wrote down, it seems like, and I'm sorry, I realized we should have done introductions and some sort of weird icebreaker, you know, what's your favorite animal, at the beginning, so we would all know each other between these two committees. But with the exception of April, I think everybody on the CRC has maybe sort of half volunteered to be on the committee. But I would say, you know, if, and then agreement that a smaller committee's better, that maybe it is sort of some questions and strategic framing with the CRC, and this is, you know, looking to how that moves forward, and then more sort of legwork, technical expertise and answers being done by the task force. I don't think I said it as well as you did, but is that about right? And then, you know, and truly, I want to say a couple things. One, I think the task force can be nimble. I don't think that there needs to be publishing of agendas and all of that. I think it can be a real working task force, and that the reporting back to the CRC, that's where it'll be recorded and minutes and open meetings and blah, blah, blah. And to some extent, you know, there does need to be, I think, maybe a chair, a vice chair, a few more members, maybe 3 or 4 more if we're getting to 5 or 6 was what I sort of heard. And that there could even be, I don't know, but the committee can get or task force can get wildly creative to have temporary memberships. We would invite you to be an expert guest or a temporary member of the task force for the next few meetings while we think about our banking or HR or real estate pieces, you know, that there can be a sort of freedom to, you know, I think we have a lot of expertise in the community that would be willing to, and just to say, we're looking at volunteer positions, we're looking at asking people to use their expertise and time in a volunteer way, and I think a lot of folks will do that for the Santa Fe Public Schools, and, you know, we want to appreciate that, acknowledge the community capital that will be mobilized through the expertise and blah, 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 so, you know, go ahead. Yeah. Oh.
I don't know if this is appropriate for Robert's Rules of Order, and also I really appreciate you letting me participate from here, but I would, if it's all right, I feel like if I were to make a proposal, I feel like we have it. I'm terrible with names again, but I think for the board, Bose and Beta have been mentioned a number of times, and I feel like the CRC, we've got Daniel, whose name I already forgot.
You just said it.
Who's like, cool, like, it seems like you understand the map of the types of issues that come up in a housing project and housing strategy. Awesome. And then woodworker Ryan. Still? I'm sorry.
Well, and Jessica volunteered too.
Yeah. And but I hear from you often, like, this refrain that is like, well, what is the role of the CRC? When do we need to be engaged? And what is the role of our connection in community? And to me, those two viewpoints for me as a person are enough. And I know, like, so if there's one person like, okay, we're running the housing thing, and another person is like, when do we need to be engaging the CRC? Who do we need to pull in? When? How far can we go as a committee before we, well, as a task force before we come back to the committee? Like, that kind of thinking to me covers what I would want represented, and I'm interested in also, like, I don't want to exile anybody, but just thinking in terms of specific people, I would, like, mindsets I would want represented. That would allow me to feel like, cool, I'll need to be a part of that. Hit me up if you need. And I'd be happy to challenge it. I'm sorry if I stepped on anyone's toes. I'm just feeling the, like, let's get it to ground.
So Jessica and Dylan arm wrestle for it.
Either that or play Scrabble.
How passionate do you guys feel about it? How available do you feel about it? What would it feel like for each of you to back out and then be backed in? If it creates a scarcity or competition, I don't see a reason why both of you can't be on it. I'm not trying to create that. I'm just trying to, like, ram it.
Simon, why are you trying to make us fight?
Yeah. It's like 0 to 10, how strongly do you feel about being on it?
Well,
I personally, I feel inside myself like a 4. If there wasn't somebody who was on a housing thing and felt like I get this thing, I'd be like, okay, let me get in there. I have that skill set. I'm a team. Because somebody's there, it's like 4. Where is everybody?
I'm not sure that we have to be at the number 4 rather than the number 5.
Oh, no. 4, I mean 4 out of 10.
No, I know what you're saying, but I'm saying in terms of the number of people on the committee, I don't know that it has to be necessarily the number 5. And I want to recognize that Danny and Susan also expressed an interest in being on the committee. I'm interested in the issue, and I would like to be on the committee, but I'm also happy to step back if it feels like it's getting too loaded.
Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, I just want the work to be done well. I just want the outcome, you know, for me. I just come to it as a parent. I know, Dylan, you do too, with kids young in the school system. So I think we feel very personally invested And, you know, my dad was a teacher, so I'm always going to be thinking about teachers and school staff and their experience as well as the students. So, you know, I think any combination of folks here is going to be great.
Okay, we'll do Alana first and then Board Member Blythe. Go ahead. You've got your own mic if you want it, it looks like.
So on behalf of NEA Santa Fe, I'd like to nominate Grace Mayer to be on this subcommittee. She knows a lot about this, and I think she'd be excellent.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, President Noble. As, you know, just looking at this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the CRC will get a bite at the apple, right? Because the task force will talk into the CRC. And then the board will have a bite at the apple because then the CRC jointly with the task force will then recommend to the board. So everybody in this room will get a bite at the apple at some point to discuss or whatever. So I just want to clarify that. Is my understanding correct? Okay, cool.
Grace, are you willing?
Yes.
Okay.
I've missed you, Grace.
Board Member Beta, do you want to say anything? You haven't accepted or rejected your...
No, I accepted it, and I think, like Board Member Blythe said, everybody's going to have a role at some point. So, yeah, this is great.
But you're up for it?
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely.
Just last, thank you, President Noble. The last thing I'll say is I feel pretty strongly that Danny should represent on the task force, just because, I mean, his work with systems, and this is a very complicated issue, and I think that that would just be kind of, you know, that's kind of where I'm coming from in looking at having Danny participate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, are you up for chairing? Does anybody have objections to that idea? Daniel chairing? Okay. Thus far, if I'm not mistaken, we've got Daniel Werwath as chair. We could have some vice chair, but I don't know who that is. But we've got Vice President Bozay and Board Member Abeta. We've got Grace Mayer. That's 4 people, just counting. I'm not sure what's happening here, but we have a strong preference from Juan for Danny to be on there. And where are we other than that?
I'm going to go ahead and step back.
Okay.
Because it sounds like it might be too many.
Jessica, Simon, I think this is, at this point, sort of a coalition of the willing, unless anybody's going to object to anything, which doesn't feel like what we're doing. So I think it's sort of a little bit your choices. And just to say, also, you could try and then step back if it doesn't feel right. Like, again, this doesn't, we're sort of, it's a task force, it's not a committee, we're not doing Open Meetings Act publishing agendas, it'll be nimble and fluid, and I would suggest, you know, given the timeline, 3 to 6 months, if we're even going to attempt, which sort of actually does imply a 6-month deadline, if we're going to attempt to meet what's said in the resolution, even with 6 months, I think there's a lot of work and a committee that's got to be nimble, so I think there's also a question of staff support for the committee, just in terms of things of scheduling meetings. You know, I think having done a lot of this work in a lot of different ways, there can be, I guess I would say, and you know, Superintendent, I think you probably need to weigh in here, but we can't ask Daniel or any other member of the committee, unless somebody wants to volunteer, to take that on. Like, there will need to be basically somebody who's sending out meeting invites, making sure there's a location for a meeting. I mean, some of that can be directed as ever by a chair and or vice chair, but just the legwork of like, could we have that resolution printed? Did somebody find that survey? You know, there's just gonna have to be, I think, somebody assigned as distinct support for the task force.
President, we can make that happen, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I would like to make a recommendation as one of the board members be the vice chair, so that there's a balance between the board and the CRC. So,
Now we're back to arm wrestling.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to suggest that the board member Abate to be the vice chair.
That's fine.
Okay. We got a chair, we got a vice chair.
I'm not arm wrestling tonight.
I think Dylan stepped back. Jessica, Simon, do you want to be on the initial list?
If you're in, I'll back out.
No, I think that I would do it the other way. If I don't feel compelled, I think Daniel maybe as the chair, we just chat for 5 minutes afterward. I'll let you know things that I could be helpful with.
And I was going to say, I'd probably like to just consult with you on some process design.
I know,
ones,
right?
And
my job's kind of process design.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Like, I'm happy to just
Yeah. And I think like just to sketch out a rough idea of what I would sort of envision for this is to spend the next CRC meeting really diving in on what are the questions, what are the issues, what are the priorities from the CRC perspective, then have the task force develop a process design that can be brought back to the CRC for upgrade, comment, feedback, and then be able to undertake that work. I mean, I think actually, until we do that process design, we don't totally know who the best members would be, right? A little bit, but we've got enough to get started, for sure. And then envision that committee reporting out to the CRC at monthly meetings on progress and checking in and pulling in expertise as needed and pulling in members as needed if there's particular perspectives or things that come up that people are passionate about. I'm a huge fan of a hell yes rule on this stuff. That's like somebody feels really strongly about something we're doing or a topic we're getting on to get involved and be able to be a little more fluid in that way. But I think, you know, in general, yeah, the smaller groups are more effective and can move faster in 6 months. Like, you know, I've worked on 8 or 9 housing strategies for local governments, right? And I haven't finished a one in under 6 months. So just, you know, keeping realistic expectations. So if we want to be really, and I think we do need to be expeditious. I mean, we've got a construction project at hand. We've got, you know, cadences of things. There's a lot of reasons to be quick and effective about this. But yeah, that's just what I would propose, that we spend some time at the next CRC meeting really focusing in on what are the questions to be answered, have the task force come back with a process design of how they propose to answer those, and then go into the work.
Sounds real good.
Yeah.
President Noble, if I may ask a question.
Of course.
Where are we in the process? What has staff been directed to do so far, and where are we? Do we know?
I think we just lost the key guy to answer
Oh,
that
sorry.
question. But, you know, just to say, some of the urgency is around spending some capital outlay that's already been allocated.
Do we know how much that is?
We do, and Dr. Weaver might be able to say it, but again,
One chunk is like $750 and one chunk is $850.
That's correct. It's 1.5 million roughly.
And do we know when it was appropriated?
What, the first set expires next year in 2027 and then.
6/30/27.
Yeah,
first
and-
tranche of 806,000.
Okay, 800, and then the second in 28.
Thank you.
You spend 800,000 on architectural designs. So, yeah.
Did you want Dr. Weaver to answer any other timeline questions? Or Jean?
I mean, I think Jean's coming back, so Jean, you're just in time. We're just gonna ask you for an update. We've got the money and when the first tranche expires, but an update on where we are on the project itself, if you would, please.
We've actually engaged an architectural and engineering team. We've got civil, mechanical, design team all on board. We've engaged the city in terms of utilities, and looks like everything is in really good place there. We're looking at doing the project obviously in phases at this point based on the available funding. So we've had to sort of shape the planning and design work in order to maximize what we can get out of that first phase with approximately $5.5 million that we have available now or soon. Looks like that will be between 10 and maybe 14 units if we're optimistically, we can put that much together. So work has begun. We're a long way down the road in terms of the concept on this. So what our design team is doing is refining that at this point and doing the hard work of turning that into buildable. But progress is, like I said, it's underway. I've tasked them with having initial packages together for our subsurface work in 3 to 4 months. So that's our target right now.
And there might be an initial download of all these things, I suppose, between the committee and the team, because that's a lot of work so far. Did you want to say something, Dr. Gonzalez? Why do I keep hallucinating that you want to talk?
I'm tired.
I want to hear from you. Financing. I think, if I'm not mistaken, deferring to Daniel and Roman here, but that is something we might need to think about and talk about real soon. Because, again, knowing just enough to be dangerous, but the financing, which, we're probably not tax credits or anything extra complicated but like that, but housing developments are generally pretty complex financing and maybe fairly different from the way public schools finances our school buildings. So I don't know if there's a gap there in terms of how we're thinking about this that we need to talk about, but ultimately, I'm pretty sure we would need to dig into, and again, and I don't know the order of operations here, but Daniel, you said something earlier about basically, would it generate income? And how we're thinking about some basically project pro forma of somebody who would operate this thing, what we might look at rents, and all of that. I don't know how much thinking there has been. I suspect we've looked at construction costs mostly, but where income comes from and how it works for the school district with the ownership potentially of the property and the ownership direction, but with I imagine a substantial, partnership, either with a developer and an operator or somebody who's both of those things. But again, we could pay somebody to build it to the architecture and engineering specs, but what happens over time with the rents, how we're using this, do we usually, houses have mortgages? Again, I'm slightly out of my depth here, but I do think we probably need to think about, and how do we, who gets the equity, right? That seemed to be a key thing with those little lots we were talking about once upon a time. We were looking at a partnership where there would be shared equity with a home ownership thing, but again, how we wrestle with and just make sure that we're not inadvertently making decisions that get us in trouble down the road on the financing of the thing is kind of a question I have.
I would think that first thing that we're doing now is going to be all rental.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it a little easier.
And I think that's the thing for me too, like an operating pro forma is really important for that rental project. And what makes this really different than a lot of like probably facilities builds for the schools, right, is that it operates a little different, and it's gonna interact with the program design. How much are you charging for rents? Based on what? How much, operating costs we can figure out pretty easy, like apartment complexes are apartment complexes, and they cost a certain amount to run. They cost about $400 or $500 a month per unit to run. So you pay for something all the way with we raise capital to pay for the whole structure. You still got to charge $400 or $500 a month to cover. You probably get some breaks on things like property taxes and those things, right? But so maybe lower. But those are the types of things that at a certain point you need to start entering in. It's an iterative thing, and you can get, like in an Excel spreadsheet, you can get a circular reference. It's like you need a starting point to say, like, we think it's going to cost this much to operate if we charge this much for rents, and then you can start to iterate and understand. And right now we're talking about paying for everything fully, right, in the current design. But there may be ways to maximize through looking at other financing strategies for the later phases of things. I think it's a safe way to start, is not to get into, complicated financing structures. I think it makes sense to pay for everything for start and understand how things work. But I think especially as you think about other assets and the potential for partnerships with nonprofit organizations to do development work as partnerships, you can leverage. That's actual housing work is often highly leveraged in terms of, what you're actually putting in. So I think, that is a big priority for me, is to start thinking about the program design, because that informs an operating pro forma, and then an operating pro forma will probably inform program design, if that makes sense, for this particular project. And then there's a bigger question of financing strategies. So like, just to run over just a couple points really quick, like, we need to landscape what's being done, right? The
Landscape?
We need a landscape, like, what are there
What's
out
the
there?
lay of the
Yeah,
land?
what is out there right now? We have down payment assistance programs for teachers. We have, like, what is the?
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
We're not
we need
talking about bushes on the property.
No, sorry, that's like, that's
That's
an
not yet.
unfortunate overlap in terminology. But no, we need to like understand what is out there. This is like getting to the point at hand, is like, what is already out there? What is the resources the schools have? What's the best way to leverage those resources to fill the gaps or amplify the things that we know are working well? And then a little sprinkling of like, what do we anticipate? We know what the problems are now. We know what the surveys say. We know what the retention and HR problems are. But like, how do we anticipate the problems that are a couple corners away, right? And just be thinking in that way that schools are sort of always 8 years behind where they're going to be in terms of what you're doing today. So. Yeah. That kind of stuff is how I think about it. But financing's a piece of it, a big piece of it.
That's good. And one moment, just because Grace was saying, as our newest member of the task force, invited her to the
Welcome
table.
aboard, Grace.
One Jean had an answer to.
Oh.
Jean has a lot to offer for that, because that operating pro forma stuff was kind of mapped out in a lot of ways prior to even like finding the location for the site. So there was discussion about, rentals, the size of them, what the cost per rental is, depending on, it's a 2-bedroom, this or that,
Mm-hmm.
And, but there is already existing documents that can be shared already. But I also want to say that there was discussions, but it was mostly at this level, I think, and with the superintendent, about who to target and who to recruit, like using it as a recruitment and a retention tool. And we have a lot of commuters that also come from other locations that may not own a home, and seeing, like, in addition to the new people and people moving here, who are the people who are committed to our district or full-time employees that travel an hour and a half from wherever? And even if they maintain their residence somewhere else, maybe they'd stay for the week, like a Monday through Friday kind of thing. But I think there's more data than you guys realize, because it was before we even went for the, for the legislative attempts to that. There was a, you could talk about more about that. I can't even remember the firm that did that.
We actually started out with a firm, and one of the first things we worked on was a pro forma to look at how does this work for the district and what are the real obstacles and things. We've got a lot of information that hopefully we can share, which I'm hoping will make your job a little bit easier, give you a head start at least, because we had to look at all those factors and how we were going to finance this and how that affected things. The real obstacles that we have not solved is who makes the decisions about who gets to rent in a situation like this, realizing that, as Chairman Noble has said multiple times, we're not in the housing business and we're not going to be in the housing business, but we have to come up with a way to make this work and benefit our target audience, the staff and teachers of the district. So we'll be talking, because there's a lot that we can share that I think help here.
Can I just mention one thing? In terms of the early child care center, that was a model of how we came up with that. Because it was 70% educators, 30% staff. We're open to a lottery, things like that. Also, to keep in mind, educators are on a tier system, and so new teachers or educators to the district are paid like the least for the first 3 years until, and that's a targeting group. You want to get people in that can live here, but also grow them in their career. And so that's why it's really important to have an educator perspective, or like a newcomer perspective, or even a new graduate perspective on like what it takes to commit to working in a district. But we talked about even like having renting for a year up to 3 years, and then trying to get people to move on into the community or move and try to purchase their first home. But it was the 3-year mark had to do with the level licensure movement.
Yeah, and sorry, Sue, you had your hand up a little while ago.
What confuses me is how do you have this an identity crisis within there? What's the identity? You're an identity. The CRC is an identity. So who is going to be the end up person go-to group of this project? Not only just as a task force, but moving on in the future. They're going to be billed. Hopefully all the contracts and stuff are figured out. But who's the identity? Is it the school district?
Who owns it?
You don't want to be in the management stuff, but you own everything else about it.
I think that's the model, was the school district would own, we would contract with someone for operations, and, to that end, the ultimate decision-making body is the board, with the superintendent as, in essence, the chief executive, the chief administrator of the stuff. And, again, I do want to make sure that we don't hamstring future boards. We don't know what the world looks like in 20 years, so we do need to.
Or even 5 years.
Or even, but I also just want to say, Jean, it is so good to hear that, and I think now you have to cast back. Maybe you have it all in one place in the files, but truly this was a frustration. I feel some stuff got lost at least a year ago, because we had a bunch of work done. I had talked with the previous superintendent about updates. We had those consultants from Florida who took a disproportionate amount of my time to tell me about how much he liked school boards. Anyway, sorry, that's my own thing aside, but whatever happened, did they give us a report? I'm sure they gave us something once upon a time, and it doesn't even matter. I don't need specifics. I just really want to encourage a mining of all those assets from the past, and making sure that we don't do what I'm doing already, asking for work to be done that's already been done without looking at the work that's already been done, type of thing.
For sure, and we've got many files on this, lots of info. I can update you on all of those things.
Yep, that's right. Okay, so Jessica, I think Simon left, I think he stepped back. I think the question's to you as to whether you want to be on the list for the initial meeting. Anybody is free to, you know, come and go as they please on the task force, I suppose, but.
Yes, please, I'd love to be on the
All right. So we've got Daniel as chair, board member Abeta as vice chair. Additional members include Vice President Bozay, Grace Mayer, Danny Mackey, and Jessica Shelton, right? Woohoo! And, you know, we hope and then the next CRC meeting, assuming that works for everybody, there will be, you know.
Robust discussion.
Robust discussion, digging in.
And lots of questions.
And ultimately, I guess the last request I would make, and we'll leave this just sitting with my fellow board members who are on the task force, is that as this dialogue circle happens with the Housing Task Force and the CRC, to just be aware if there's any key decision points that need to be brought to the board. Because ultimately, you know, we don't want to put the CRC in a position of we've made this recommendation and then the board is reversing that. Like ideally, you know, and again, members of the CRC, same thing. If there feels like a decision that needs to come to the board, you know, we don't have to be hands off. We can, you know, and should be, as the governing body, the key deciders on key crossroad decisions, because that's what we're elected to do. Okay, anything else on this? That was, I think, a lot of good work and collaborative decision-making and discussion, so thank you all for that. It may have felt a little like driving in sand sometimes, but we got there. You feel good, Daniel?
Good.
Thank you for your service. Thank you all for your service. Okay, so we've hit on our agenda item 6, items A and B, housing resolution and CRC housing subcommittee. Again, anything else on that? Going once, going twice, going 3 and 4 times. All right. Moving on to item C, Midtown Schools, looking ahead. Simon's not here anymore. Honestly, in his question that we talked about before, sort of what is the role of the CRC in the discussion we've been having, specifically mostly about E.J. Martinez, but certainly also about Chaparral and Milagro. The board has scheduled a study session on this with few action items, right? So we don't fall behind on contracts and anything else, for January 29th. And that will be a point when the superintendent and team bring to the board fleshed out options, numbers, timelines, data, information for the 3 options that the board identified and acted on at our last meeting. And ultimately, you know, I guess my view, and of course would like board members to weigh in and any discussion from members of the CRC, but is that we need to engage the CRC in thinking about this bigger picture and strategy and facilities that I do think involves 3 and 5 schools. And again, you know, EJ, Chaparral, Nava, Kearney, Salazar, at least. And so partly, you know, so that we had it on an agenda and could address the sort of big thing happening and talk about it. I asked for this to be on, but I don't know if there's anything anybody else wants to weigh in on or ask about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, and I'm glad we put this on the agenda because the 29th is just going to be another temporary solution to the EJ Chaparral situation that we have. There is 3 options. I would think that after the 29th, then the superintendent would have clear direction as to what how to move forward temporarily. And the reason why I say temporary is because the thing that I learned through this whole exercise was that there is an issue with Midtown schools and the schools in general and declining population, impact to budget. And as a result, I think we do need to take a look at the big picture and what we are going to do as a long-term solution. We've talked about Milagro K-8. That's a possibility. We've talked about building one brand new elementary school that serves all of the Midtown. And then we have to take a look at what impact that is going to have on the other, what's happening with the schools on the east side, what's happening to the schools in my district on the south side. But we need the CRC, in my estimation, I think we need the CRC's input on a permanent solution to not just the Midtown, but the district in general. Because I think what I've heard, and you hear it even at school board conferences that we go to, this is something that schools are facing, not just in the state, but in the country. We're not having kids anymore at the rate that we used to be. And so the Midtown schools could be a start to the bigger picture. So I'm glad it's on here, and I appreciate the CRC and the expertise that we already have, especially with Chair Gallegos. That really is the role of the CRC, is a school facility and what is appropriate for our district. So.
President Noble, thank you, Member Bate. I appreciate that perspective. I just want to say something. I want to acknowledge something, though, if that's cool. I want to acknowledge and what I really don't want to lose ever is the passion of the school communities that are showing up to really voice their position. All the emails were very well thought out. Some were like, wow, this is publishable. And so I really think that the schools that have showed up and the people that have showed up have done so with passion and just heart and absolute love. And I know that sometimes it's contentious, but as we move forward in the CRC looking at these buildings and as these facilities and what's best for Santa Fe, keep in mind the heart and keep in mind the love, because that's what I think that's what Santa Fe's strength is the love of our community. I don't think there's anybody here who doesn't love our community. I just think that we need to figure out, really it kind of feels like a lot of the ways that maybe we haven't been minding the store as much as we should have. Not this school board, I'm talking about the community. Santa Fe, Greater Santa Fe hasn't really done that, in my opinion. And so now we're kind of feeling the effects of that. And so now we have the unenviable task of having to address it. But I also want to say, if anybody in the community thinks that anybody who has a responsibility, like President Noble, Vice President Jose, Secretary Gonzalez, and Board Member Abeta, the things that have happened over the last year within the school year have been an interference in moving things forward and moving the needle. But I think in that, I don't think anybody hasn't cared, and I don't think anybody hasn't been blind or apathetic or numb to the situation. And I think that's kind of been implied in a lot of the statements, that somehow the school board didn't necessarily turn a blind eye to the things. That's not what my perspective is. I see the community, there was a lot of things that had to happen on the fly. There was a lot of decisions flying around. There was a lot of just operational change that really interfered with the outcomes of our kids. And so just with all the public comment, I just want to make it clear that going forward, I don't know what's happened between anything, but I know that this governing body has its heart in the community very much, in very many ways. And so believe me, and I know this for a fact, that as we discuss options, and to Board Member Abeta's point about short-term and long-term health, it's done so from a perspective of care for our community. So I just wanted to say that, President Noble.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to ask a clarifying question, but I haven't yet been able to, I wasn't able to attend the last board meeting, nor have I had time to review the recording. But I did read the news coverage, and so I'm aware of the 3 options that are being further explored with the superintendent and staff working on fleshing out those options. So just so that I'm clear, does that mean that other options like redistricting are off the table?
Redistricting.
Sorry, like rezoning EJ into surrounding zones.
I think the consensus that we did reach at the board meeting last week is that we feel strongly about keeping the EJ community together.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of what
Okay.
environment they'll be in next year.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Is that in the short term or in the long term? If you're asking the CRC to come up with long-term solutions for these 5 schools, are we to understand that closing EJ is off the table for the long term as well?
I don't believe it's off the table. But it's not just about EJ though either. It's Nava, it's Kearney, it's the impact of Milagro would go K-8. I think we need to look at all the schools. It's unfortunate that EJ's the school that is having to be the one that makes us confront this question, but no, that's not off the table. But again, it's not just, again, it's not about EJ, it's about all the schools in the Midtown area.
Thank you, Board Member Beta. And to that point, one of the things that you look at, right, when you're rezoning students is what are the domino effects of that? And so when we start talking about redistricting or rezoning or doing this to a school community, well, we have to look at what's the impact to the entire community and how's that going to happen. So it's not that it's, to my perspective, it's not like we're saying this is off the table long term. What we're saying is in terms of how population growth is changing and in terms of how, student populations are changing, we have to look at that whole thing, not just as the school board, but as a community. We have to look at the whole enchilada about what's happening in Santa Fe, right? Not just short term, yes, it's EJ, but long term, it's Santa Fe and what is our student population going to do and how do we improve it? And I do want to kind of look at how do we improve our student population numbers. And so those are the kinds of things. I think that's what it means. I don't think necessarily we're saying, I want to be very careful of saying anything is on or off the table long term because it's a much bigger picture than just looking at any one slice of the community pie.
If I could respond to that. So I think in light of that, it's very important to not give the wrong impression to EJ or Chaparral, because what I'm hearing from them a lot is like there were promises made and then promises taken back, that we were told this was going to happen and then this happened. So I was at the last meeting and the impression I got from the EJ audience as I was sitting among them was when the board said like EJ is going to stay together, the sense I got from them was like EJ is going to stay together, like for the long term. And so I just think it's really important to be very careful with our language around what we're promising and what we're not promising. So ultimately, I think it's great that we're focusing on a long-term solution, that you're going to ask the CRC to do that. I think that we should try to have a very ambitious timeline about making that long-term solution, only because as big of a question as it is, it's been a question, I think, that's been in process for many, many years. And I think everyone is, in addition to wanting a solution to this crisis, they want a North Star. They want a goal that we're heading towards. They want a sense of clarity around where we're heading. I think it's easier to deal with some of the difficulty in the moment when you feel like you're heading in the right direction. But through that process, I think it's just very important to be open and clear that if everything's on the table, then everything's on the table, and that we don't make promises that we can't keep.
Funnily enough, when we did a strategic plan, which I think our strategic plan expired, it's still pretty good, but Dr. Veronica Garcia, who of course was our superintendent at the time, What informed that was called Project North Star. Literally, she went around doing Project North Star and all of that. And there's a bunch of, I agree with you, and I really appreciate that perspective. I think there's a bunch of work to be done here. And, you know, I want to be clear, and this is one, again, I think we need to stay real intentional and ideally as closely connected as we can between the CRC and the board, because I would say just sticking to the facts and the cycles, right? We just did a bond in 2025. That gives us 4 years before the next one, and we really need to have, and as well as the reallocations along the way, and I would agree, we need to do this on an expedited timeline. If there is one theme to what we're hearing, it's sort of what you said. It's about clarity, decision-making, and, you know, a timeline upon which what we're doing, because we do need to digest, and we may have additional questions on costs and timelines, and things have changed, you know. So ultimately, I kind of think if we can be really well prepared for as many reallocations as we have over the bond cycle and the next bond cycle around thinking or tackling this big question of Midtown schools, that would be wild success. And if it can be, it needs to be fit into a strategic plan for the school district. And with that sort of clear direction and North Star, and grappling with these really hard things of our declining enrollment, but crucially, and again, you know, personally, I feel like I took my best swing at this through the reimagining work when we stopped EJ from the closure vote in November 2019, the last time it happened. You know, I really have given it my all as to how we can do more strengths-based, student-centered learning strategy. And it frankly breaks my heart that we're just back to, in particular, talking about Milagro as a building. And, you know, that school community has shown up some. You know, I think we have seen the beauty of the EJ school community and the Chaparral community a lot. And, you know, anyway, I think the CRC's very clear function is around that bond money, which is really important, but we have been trying for a long time, I certainly have, speaking for myself, to connect that building bond money better to the program of the schools and the learning and what we're seeing from the children of today and the evolving things from how they learn, what they need, the staff, and meeting their real needs, and not just sticking to an outmoded model of education designed in an agricultural economy. And, you know, but frankly, we do still have that. And how we wrestle with this, I think the board needs to stay real close to it, because there is no other board member who was part of that vote in November 2019 currently on the board. And frankly, how we make those assurances in the long run is hard, because the board turns over too. And anybody, and there is a long history of votes to close Acequia Madre, to Suque Elementary, Acequia Madre, and then there's Alvord, Latagoite, and Connie, and then there's, we heard the most recent one of merging Capshaw de Vargas, and there has been so much pain and trauma over time of Even, somebody was telling me about rebuilding Carlos Gilbert, which got the beautiful new facility, and how awful those conditions were when they were redoing that school. So, you know, that tension between the immediate and the long term, but ultimately, and that's my hope, is that all of us, as the CRC, you know, we've got reallocations, and we've got a bond cycle coming in less than 4 years. And we have got to wrestle with this on a more expeditious timeline than that, and hopefully be able to tie it all together. And honestly, it's really hard. And, you know, I am frankly fighting a certain amount of despair around the reimagining process. And, you know, even the schools of innovation, which we haven't really fleshed out how that would work, but, and all the work we did there, really trying to make this not just a fight, don't close our school, it's about a building, but where we look at the kids, where we are smarter and more strategic. And I hope we can carry that learning forward, but ultimately, you know, in the end, it takes 3 votes to do just anything. So how we do that really intentionally, and how this committee wrestles with it, I guess I would just say it's a big ask, and it's really important, and I know April's been trying to do it for a long time, but ultimately, you know, I guess the ask is to every CRC committee member, as you think about this, to talk to your board members, to be really intentional about that connection to board decision-making, because all of this is right. But in the end, you know, we do have a decision-making structure, and it's a vote of 5 people. And that can change over time. And truly, I mean, the Ezequiel Madre story is partly that there was a change. There was a vote to close it, and then there was a sweep of 3 seats on the board, and then it was reversed. And, you know, Atalaya is kind of big, I think, because it was meant to have Ezequiel folded into it. And again, then there was a sweep of a board and a reversal. So you're right, and we'd love to, and I think we do need to, I absolutely agree, we need to be careful about the language, but I also, I mean, forgive me if I'm getting fatalistic. I'm like, I don't know what the board looks like 4 years from now, or 3 years from now.
Thank you, President Noble. I think to counter that, though, I mean, recognizing that people come and go, systems should be in place that could account for those kinds of things. And I think that, you know, I think one of the things that I've seen, like in Englewood, Colorado, they do a much better job of using funds to come up with long-term plans such that there's a fabric kind of woven in, so that when there are changes, certain things are already kind of spelled out. And, you know, I think the upheaval, and I'm sorry to keep talking about the upheaval, but the upheaval shouldn't have had the impact that it did, right? Like, that shouldn't have happened, but it did. And, I mean, it impacted everything. It impacted, you know, like we were talking about the housing and these other things that were happening. Things got lost in the shuffle, and it was all because of just stupid adult behavior impacting our kids. And if we had a framework in place that was being, you know, monitored, accountable, and saying, hey, we're measuring this, then perhaps it could have sustained, there would have been some kind of like a fail-safe to account for that kind of junk. I mean, I know.
Have you read the reimagining stuff? You know, I mean, again, it's hard, and I agree with you, and, you know, have taken a good old swing at it.
No, I know.
But, you know, and we are here.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I just want to say kind of everything that I heard you talking about, and I want to be clear while we're all together, to give really clear focus to the CRC. I mean, like, I'm sitting here reading our policy again, and we worked on this policy in large part because so many of the conversations coming out of the CRC centered on close this building, close that building, close this building. What work do we actually want coming out of this, and how do we focus that and make sure that it's of the quality, and a lot of that comes back to the board being clear about what we're asking for and what we need. And so staying in close touch, which I heard you say over and over, and I think, you know, we need to give some clear direction here, because is it, you know, we have this policy for phasing out schools if they're under-enrolled, and how we do that. You know, I brought that up multiple times when we were sitting here, because people would say, well, we need to have a plan, but we do. Like, that came out of reimagining. We recognize that there's an issue, and if we create a roadmap for ourselves and we're not following it, then we either need to adjust the roadmap or we need to adjust our actions. And so, like, you know, if we're asking, I think having a goal for this committee to be starting to work on visions for the next bond, like, this is where we're going. Let's not wait until a year ahead. And that, I think, is the reactivity of the cycle that we've been in. Which is why I instantly went to, when do we start the FMP? Let's adjust this, right? Because if we're working back from that, that's not enough time. If that's when we're starting to have the discussions about our facilities and the usage, that's not enough time for us to be thoughtful and to think comprehensively and to engage all of our stakeholders the way that we're supposed to. So yes, let's do it better for next time. And we have some immediate issues that we need to resolve, and we have bigger
And let's be clear,
long-term
there's $14 million that was prioritized for EJ and Chaparral. And again, and that, you know, that money needs to be programmed. There's significant reallocations often that come forward. Like, we've got a lot on the table. And because the CRC is the place where, you know, we have vested this recommendation and deep work of vetting of the capital money, I think it's just, you know, and the board's got a whole lot to do, and have along the way.
Yeah.
But
So-
there's, you know, there's money this cycle.
Right. So thinking about that money and the facilities and how to serve the students in the best way possible.
Within the constraints of a budget, though, that you get based on student population. We could have all the capital money in the world to build 30, 40, 50 schools. What I learned a long time ago in city government, county government, is capital sometimes is that's the easy money, but the operating money, the recurring expenses, year after year, salaries, insurance, that comes from the number of students we have. And so you can't look at buildings without looking at the cost of running those buildings. And we talked about this, the first meeting with EJ and Chaparral, and that gym was, every school needs a principal, and those are recurring costs year after year, where the building, yes, there are recurring building costs, but again, we have bonding capacity, that's a lot easier to fund. And so we have the work we do has to be with the backdrop of what is the student population, what is the operating budget, and how is that going to affect the decisions about schools.
Well, and just to add another layer there is that as we think about the programs that are happening inside those buildings, right, we've talked about the way that the number changed for the EJ estimate, and like bare bones versus, you know, everything under the sun that they could ever possibly want. And maybe there's something in between that. But it never really sat right with me to think about building a bare bones school. That doesn't feel equitable either. You know, we have incredible programs and we're spreading our resources really, really thin. And I don't know that that's the best use of those resources for our kids. So, you know, like, that's something that I've been thinking about and am concerned about as well.
With EJ, the bare bones, you won't know until you get in there. The bare bones could be And like one person said, well, why can't we have our kids in the building, part of it? Why, you can't, because you don't know what you're gonna find. You don't know what extra we'll have to do. You know, maybe we find some basic structures that we thought were okay, but they're not, because they're very old. So some of the families who want to stay at EJ, well, by the time something gets repaired, and it's a can of worms sometimes in an old building, their kids are too old to go there. I mean, it's difficult, but I've worked there for 2 years. I know what it's like. The center atrium flooded once, and there was dirt flooding all the way in reams because it's open to the outside, and it was flooded on a bad rain day. And it drops off right away into the arroyo. So where are you gonna, you'd have to tear down the regular building while you're still building a new building somewhere that would be farther away from the street, because that's a huge safety. I mean, anybody can get into that building, because it's big windows, and they can safe, and bushes, and you can easily get into that building. So people don't realize you just can't do construction and have kids in a building at the same time, because somebody's gonna get hurt, and then one of those parents who wanted their kid there will probably sue. I mean, it's the safety of the building, and that's an old building, and you're not gonna know what you find until you start.
April, then Jessica.
So just as a follow-up to what you said, Sue, hasn't it been determined that the building is not usable or salvageable in any condition? Hasn't that already been determined, like over the last couple of years? Or are we revisiting that? Is there a possibility?
Well, you know, you can spend enough money on anything, right? But realistically, the building has got some serious issues that even more have been uncovered. It becomes very expensive and difficult to consider fixing that building. So you have to look at all the other possibilities too. It's not impossible. We were asked to look at that, and we are. But we have to factor in all the things that would need to do, and in the end, you still have an old building. You know, there's issues that you really are hard to deal with when you're looking at it from that side.
Jessica?
So
sorry,
I just
go
have
ahead.
one other piece, sorry, Jessica.
No.
So just the question I have is, what does the board need from us at this point in time to go forward, next step? Have we determined that?
Yeah, you.
Again, I think we're gonna make a decision on the 29th, or give clear direction on a temporary solution. And then the CRC needs to start looking at a permanent solution for the
Okay.
midtime down schools.
So the board's gonna make a determination for short-term, ask us to look at it long-term, we'll bring those recommendations back to you within the time frame you determine. So, okay.
And
Thank
a
you.
larger decision around Midtown schools.
Yes,
not
yes,
just-
that's gonna be the
yes,
component that the CRC studies.
Yeah, a series of, yeah.
Okay. Very good, thank you for that.
Sorry, Jessica.
That's okay, that actually was, I just had that process question of like, you know, if the board is planning on taking action on January 29th, I wasn't sure if there was planned any additional interaction with the CRC before making a decision, based on what the superintendent and staff come up with on the 29th.
No, I think the board made a motion, it was voted on, here are 3 options, tell us the pros and cons of all 3, and then move forward with one of the 3.
Okay. And it's staff that's gonna report on the pros and cons of those 3 options,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Not the CRC?
No,
Okay.
staff.
Yeah.
Thank you, okay.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say, is that there's a key piece here, which is, you know, and what Sue's saying and all this stuff, which is, of course, the board, we are elected volunteer positions who don't work in the district all day, every day. In fact, a few of us have actual other jobs, even though I love this job as well. But ultimately, how that works, and I really do think this is actually the most important thing, and we can talk about ourselves, we can talk about the board, we can talk about the CRC, we have a lot tonight, but an absolute key piece is the staff is the superintendent, is the administration, is the questions, the data requests being reasonable, targeted, relevant, you know, how we get, because ultimately we need, and truly, the best recommendations probably should come from staff about how to think about it and what to think about, because these are folks who live and breathe it every day. So that interface, you know, I view as more important than almost anything, because we have our experts who know the things, who've done this a few times, you know, and frankly, how we move forward. We had, you know, a deputy superintendent and chief operating officer who was here forever, and she's not here anymore. And, you know, how we really intentionally sort of fill whatever was going on there and remake everything in her absence. I still think, I mean, that was what, 10, 15-year run that Christy Yonda Wagner had. You know, it's a big void, and it's a big change. And, you know, there's a lot here that ultimately it's the superintendent's job to run that department and bring us, as both the CRC and the board, the information, ideally recommendations, ideally creative solutions. Ideally, we can all check our egos at the door and think creatively and get out of the box and ask questions. And, you know, truly, I'm still hoping for some magical solution nobody's seen yet. If somebody tells me, you know, we've got a way that for $4.5 million, we can wave a magic wand and have a solution tomorrow, I would really like that.
Heck, even for 14 million.
Heck, even for 14 million. And, you know, but ultimately, we've just got to dig in and do the work and keep the communication, and particularly that work with the team and the staff, and then between the committee and the board. And what Roman's saying is exactly right, because I think it's like some of that program stuff and staffing stuff and ongoing operational stuff is more the board's purview than the CRC's, right? So how we make sure that those things are connected. ¿Qué más? All right, so, you know, I think you stated it mostly. Thank you, April. Sounds like Jessica was on the same page just in terms of process clarity. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
And I really feel strongly that, like, the communication needs to flow between the CRC and the board and the staff really well. All right, anything else? Anybody else want to weigh in? Staff team down there, you want to weigh in? Okay, we're going to move on. Advanced planning, note for board members, our meeting tomorrow is at 4:30, not 4, as listed on the agenda, right? Yes, Alma confirmed. I wrote it down.
Yes.
It will be go into executive session, come out and close the meeting, because that's what we do. But there will be a public portion, really, of substance tomorrow. And then there's the PI meeting Carmen would want us to note. And then there's our study session on the 29th. I do want to say to the board members that are still here, thinking about what we do for the 29th in terms of public comment, and maybe if it's okay with the two of you, given that Carmen's not here, Sarah and I can talk with the superintendent. I'm thinking something along the lines of really asking for emails by maybe even the evening of the 28th or by some time ahead of the 29th, and not doing a public comment with the microphone that night,
But, you know, asking for emails, phone calls, but really opening the doors intentionally ahead of that. Because I do think we've heard a lot. I want to make sure that we are still able to do our best thinking and best work on that evening of the 29th. And yeah, if we do, you know, hours of public comment, it's very hard at a level of exhaustion, and, you know, when we've all had our work days and that sort of thing. So any thoughts on that?
President Noble, I think we've done our work, we've narrowed it down. You have 3 options that we voted on. I think you bring us the pros and cons of each option, we give you direction, and you implement what ultimately, I think at this point, since it is temporary, it almost is more of a superintendent decision than board decision. I mean, I went back and looked at the record. We didn't ever take an official vote to move EJ into Chaparral. That was a superintendent decision. We were informed about it, and I kind of see it the same way. We've heard from the public over the last so many months, and again, we narrowed it down. Bring us the 3 options, we'll give you direction, and you move forward with one of them. And then we start working through the CRC on the big permanent solution. And that's ultimately what the board needs to vote on, is the permanent solution, not just for EJ, but for all EJ, Chaparral, all of those schools. So I agree.
But we've committed to direction.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And so the question about public comment.
I don't think we're gonna hear anything we haven't already heard. It's emotional for everybody involved. EJ, Chaparral, Milagro, and this is temporary. This isn't permanent. We're not, what gets decided on the 29th is not permanent. There's a bigger picture here and a bigger question that we need to answer.
Are you required to have the public comment period? And one other question I have, just a housekeeping question about that, is part of like the committee and board packets, can public comments be added to that? Like, so we can go back and look to see if what public comments there were? Like,
Well, they're in the minutes.
oh, okay, all the public comments are?
They should be, yeah.
Okay.
I believe, no, they're not?
I don't,
Yeah,
are
they should
they?
be. I saw them, I mean,
They're recorded
They're
and
there.
in the minutes?
I mean, they were there, right?
Yeah.
They're on the video.
And the other 2.
Reference there, you can go.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, that's where we can get the public comments.
you can
Yeah.
listen to both together. And it's also in the minutes too as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, the emails are in our emails, which we could certainly put up in records, yeah. That, yeah, the emails are, yeah, and those could be included as, I am sure, just as a separate packet, as a record for those meetings of all the emails that have been received and that sort of thing. Yeah.
President Noble, I just want to add that the one thing I have heard loud and clear is make a decision already.
Yeah.
EJ, the parents, the kids, they need to know how we're going to move forward. And sometimes, again, public hearing, we can be here for hours, and minds could get changed, and then we just land up having another meeting and kicking it further down the road. Like I said, I think we came to 3 options, and we need to act on them so that the EJ community and Chaparral knows where they're going to be next year.
President Noble, I mean, I'm okay with it, as long as, what I don't want is for it to come across as we're limiting a perspective. As long as we give people an opportunity to share their perspective, then I'm okay with it. I don't want to put a limiting factor, so like, whatever deadline it is, it'd have to be enough time to make sure that whomever wants to still have a perspective, that they have that opportunity. Maybe not the night of the meeting. I could see the reason why, because we do have to, I do think putting a vote and making a decision, because I don't know necessarily that we delayed a decision. I think we just needed more information. At least I needed more information. I didn't feel like I had an informed perspective. So that was just, that was my perspective, I'll just stick to me, is that I kind of felt like I needed more information. So it wasn't like I delayed anything. It's just more of a, I wanted to hear more perspectives, I wanted to hear it directly. It was my first meeting, and so I wanted to hear it. And especially the people impacted, as long as they've had that opportunity. I agree that there's been a lot shared, and it you know, there's been a lot kind of, you know, ground that's been kind of trod or whatever. But I just don't want to limit that. So I'm okay with saying no public comment the night of, as long as there's ample time to get those emails in, and that we all have, you know, ample time to read them and digest them before the meeting. As long as we can do that, then I'm okay with it.
Can you say what that ample time is for you?
Well, it
To read
depends on
and
how many.
digest.
Like, today it wasn't so bad, because it was only, what, 14 or something?
There were
like that?
14, not 50, yeah.
Yeah, 50. The 50 was a little bit difficult, because I had to cancel meetings to be able to do it. Again, it was unexpected, so that was on me. But as long as I have like 4 hours, I think I'm okay.
Okay, so if our deadline was midnight the night before, so you were
Yeah, that
given
should
the
be good.
entire day
Yeah,
of
that'd be cool.
the 29th?
Yeah, the 29th is going to be just dedicated to this, so.
Right, well, and
yeah.
some staff time to compile them to send to us.
Sure.
If midnight's
Right.
that's
Ask-
enough, yeah.
Good point, yeah.
Thank you. Maybe 4 o'clock on the 28th, sorry.
Yep. Yes.
And just again, to add to that, like, strong commitment from all of us to read those, because that really, really matters.
If I could just add, just trying to really get that out to the public also, that is what's gonna happen. Get your comments in by this date, you're not gonna have the opportunity that day, so they don't cry foul after the fact.
Yep, so maybe we could get that out as soon as possible tomorrow, and even by text message, because that is our most effective.
And it'd be great if like every school could send it out. 'Cause
Yeah.
It's a whole,
District, it's everybody.
district-wide issue.
It is.
Everyone should have an opinion.
So if it would please the board, we would send out communication tomorrow for January 28th by 4 o'clock. So
fine.
our staff has an hour before to be able to compile it, sent to the board by 5 o'clock on the 28th.
Good?
Yep.
And may I actually feel like the board did make a decision in the last meeting, and I appreciated the part that we were looking at was rezoning, which has to be voted on by the board. Consolidation, which we have policy on, which has to be voted on by the board, and the board really chose to keep EJ together, and that was a decision. And so now, after listening and having time to be able to discuss everything, we're bringing back the 3 options, and we're looking forward to bringing any data that you feel like you need. We have been working hard on it, so thank you.
And the reason why, President Noble, I like that it's a study session, to have more of a free flow and really get into
Agreed,
the 3 options.
totally.
Where if it's a formal meeting with public, with all the works, then it's, I don't feel like we could really get into the 3 options and come up with what is a really good direction
Agreed.
moving forward.
I agree. And again, I want to emphasize the importance of staff and the superintendent and team. And, you know, I do, I do have some frustrations about assurances that were given to us. Obviously, the cost escalation, which some of it, there's many factors beyond our control. You know, but ultimately, there is a need for the best data, the best numbers, the best estimates we can get. You know, I could have sworn, and again, you know, my organization works in an old school, and I know that things come up, but I feel like we were told it would be good at Chaparral, and there's a lot and that's come up, and again, I don't know, because sometimes rotting pipes rot, and you didn't know that before until you get the smell. And then you go look and all the pipes are rotten. Again, there's complexity here, but the board depends on the best information that the team can give, and the superintendent, and the recommendations, and all of that. And it is, hindsight is, of course, always 20/20, but it's real hard sometimes to feel like, why the heck didn't we know a thing? And
or think about a thing and what, you know, again, I feel like the team and the work that you and the team are probably doing right now is really the critical piece. And yeah, go ahead, Juan.
President Noble, I really feel like this is really how I feel, and whatever, take it for what it's worth, but I think accountability is huge in any organization, and we are accountable to people. We're all accountable to something, but I do think that sometimes over the last 5 years within Santa Fe proper, there has been a lack of measurable accountability. And I'm hoping that we set the example as a governing body to hold things accountable and to say if there is a perspective that data has been vetted and is not contextualized or biased as much as possible, that we could read between the lines within the data to say it's not biased towards an agenda, that we could look at the data and be able to discern for ourselves that it is objective as much as possible. Data is always biased, I get that. However, I do think that holding that data accountable and the people that produce that data accountable and the policies that we have to account for. Now, I'm not saying that staff prior was not being accountable, but I think when the wheels come off of any organization, it is symptomatic of something else. And so I think going forward, having measurable accountability, I think will have that data become more trustworthy.
So yes to what you said, and yes to what you said, and I think like just to take that to another level, like that data is important because it's what we use to make decisions, and it's how we build trust as a community.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what we've struggled with over the last year. And so we need it to be the relationships among all of us. And that really, really, really matters.
To that point, Vice President Bose and President Noble, data, the way that in general, in my experience, data works best if you look at the raw data, and if you could gather the raw data and you come to the same conclusions, then that data is pretty sound. So if we look at raw data and if we could discern it ourselves and come to a same conclusion, then we could pretty much trust that data. I think, and just in talking with people that I have over the last couple of weeks, I don't think the data was vetted before it was presented in such a way as to where it could be, you know, we could ascertain, because I heard the presentation too, and it was like, that didn't sound right to me. And I never was able to go back and say, well, what the heck happened? Like, that was like wacky toast, man. Like, what the heck happened? You know, and before, you know, whatever rabbit hole or pipe hole or whatever we're going to go down, you know, I want to make sure that we can discern those, because, you know, that is basically what I've made my living doing is doing data analysis and, you know, predictive analytics. And so because of that, it is a very important thing to me. So really, if we can't look at the data and say how the data was, and look at the methodology for creating the data and come out to the same conclusions, then it's not trustworthy data.
If I may just say something about that. So, I've been through 2 full facility master plans, and that data seems to be highly reliable. It's when we take that data and present it with a SLET is
That's
what
the
I
problem.
have seen happen over the years. So that's the key component, is really looking at it from lots of different perspectives and getting our own information. Because everyone has an agenda. I mean, staff has an agenda, the board has an agenda, we as an individual. So if we can get different perspectives, then that's when we're winning, like you said. Yeah.
Agreed.
But I don't think there's really been an issue with the data. I think that's just been the way that it's been presented to achieve, obviously, an outcome. And we've all sort of been led there a lot. I'm guilty of it, I'll say. You know, we're here two hours a month, 12 hours, 12, what's that, 24 hours in a year? So we rely heavily on that, but we need to take the bias out of the presentation. That's the key, in my opinion.
And I think the study session, if I may, would be good to be able to ask questions that we may not otherwise be able to ask or feel comfortable asking necessarily.
Ask the hard questions, yes, go ahead.
It's an issue I've been thinking about recently as well, and just in some of our CRC meetings and getting a presentation and feeling a little bit like we're getting the presentation, we have the slides. These are people who clearly know a lot more about these facilities than I do, and wishing there was almost like a devil's advocate in the room to provide a different perspective. Obviously, that's not always going to be possible, but to the extent that it's possible to have some opposing viewpoints when we're analyzing certain data or being asked to make certain decisions would be great. And I don't know how feasible that is in every situation, but it's something to think about.
Well, we're back to what a good CRC member does. Right. I mean, vetting those numbers comes through exactly what you just described, right? Like, how do we take the bias out of the presentation by asking the hard questions, by asking for other numbers, you know, by thinking about it in kind of a comprehensive way. So, full circle, all the way back to the beginning.
Well done.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you.
You know, it's a good meeting.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, ma'am.
We've gone through advanced planning. Anything else on that, Superintendent? All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.